It's me, Victor. Victor's voice was softer now, almost cautious. Well, come in then, Victor. Othello's tone carried an unusual warmth, suggesting he was in a good mood. Othello had failed to awaken the blessing. In an effort to secure his title and maintain his fortune, he worked tirelessly to curry favor with the Grand Duke and Princess Natasha, the newly inherited Violet Countess. It seemed he had just finished a rather pleasant conversation with Her Highness. Victor slowly pushed open the door and stepped inside, Lucian following closely behind. Othello glanced up, an uncharacteristic smile tugging at his lips. His black suit remained pristine despite the relentless downpour outside, a testament to his meticulous nature. "Victor!" Othello greeted enthusiastically from behind his red desk. "Her Highness eagerly anticipates your new concertos this year, and the arrival of the piano. Work hard, Victor. You wouldn't want to disappoint her. And this is—" His gaze shifted to Lucian, taking in the finely dressed young man. Though they had met before, Othello failed to recall him. "I don't and I won't, Mr. Othello," Victor assured him. Then, with a gentle push, he nudged Lucian forward. "This is my student, Lucian Evans. He recently composed his first piece, and I was hoping you might take a look. After all, you are the foremost authority in serious style music." Victor carefully avoided revealing his true intentions, wanting Othello to judge the work impartially. "A new student? Since when?" Othello asked, his good mood still lingering. Accepting the sheet music from Victor, Othello casually skimmed the first few bars. His expression quickly shifted from idle curiosity to deep concentration. He was captivated. In decades of experience, he had never encountered a composition quite like this. The opening bars alone hinted at an intensity and passion he rarely saw in music. As he continued, he could already predict the powerful crescendo that lay ahead. Othello was acutely aware of his age. He had dedicated his life to religious music, upholding the belief that music should be solemn, sacred. Yet, the new wave of musicians in alto sought to express raw emotion through their compositions, a movement he had long resisted. And yet his hands trembled. His heart pounded fiercely, as if he were caught in the midst of a battle rather than reading sheet music. He despised this style. He wanted to shred these pages, to erase this defiance from existence. Music, in his mind, was meant to be calm, reverent, not this uncontrolled torrent of emotion. Yet he could not deny the brilliance of the piece. Music criticism and symphony news had already embraced this new trend. Even Princess Natasha supported it. Othello could not afford to openly reject it. The silence in the room grew suffocating. Finally, Othello placed the sheets down, his voice measured. "You are talented, Lucian. It is always a pleasure to see young musicians with promise. However, remember this. Music is a sacred gift, meant to glorify the Lord. It is powerful, but it must remain dignified and meaningful. I hope you consider this as you continue composing." Lucian barely acknowledged the comment. The idea of a magic apprentice like himself praising the Lord amused him to no end. Victor, however, was pleased. Othello had not dismissed the piece outright. That was enough. "Sir, I truly believe Lucian's work is remarkable, and I am certain you see its value as well. I would like to present it in my concert." "No!" Othello rejected the idea immediately. "Why not, Mr. Othello?" Victor challenged. Othello was taken aback by Victor's defiance, but quickly attributed it to self-interest. He assumed Victor wanted to exploit his student's talent to elevate his own reputation. "I have already shown Princess Natasha the program. Changing it now would make our association appear unprofessional. Do you wish to tarnish our reputation for your own gain, Victor?" "On the contrary, Mr. Othello," Victor countered, his resolve unwavering. "If we deliberately withhold a superior piece from the Grand Duke and Princess Natasha, we risk greater damage to our reputation. And if you insist on refusing—" Victor paused, choosing his words carefully. "Then I will personally deliver the sheet music to Miss Sylvia and request that she present it to Her Highness. I will not back down." "Victor!" Othello stood abruptly, anger flashing in his eyes. Victor held his ground, though his tone softened. "Mr. Othello, The Grand Duke and Princess Natasha favor this style of music. Consider their reaction when they hear Lucien's piece. This could benefit you as well. Othello knew that without noble support, this musical revolution would have never gained traction. He was aging. None of his descendants had awakened the blessing. He needed to secure their future and preserve his family's standing. Moreover, Victor rarely displayed such determination. If he continued to resist, Victor would surely find another way to have the piece performed. Weighing his options, Othello finally relented. Very well. 2 days before the concert, I will attend the rehearsal to ensure everything is in order. Of course, Mr. Othello. Victor clenched his fists subtly in triumph. Othello exhaled sharply, turning his gaze to Lucien. You have a gifted student, Victor. Strange that I've never heard of him before. That is because he only began studying music 3 months ago, Victor admitted. Othello blinked. 3 months? What do you mean? Exactly that. Lucien started learning music 3 months ago. Othello's mouth fell open. He surged to his feet once more. Are you joking? You expect me to believe this is his composition? I am certain, sir, Victor affirmed. His progress was witnessed by my other students. He possesses multiple drafts and manuscripts. Even Joseph has verified his work. Othello sank back into his chair, his strength seemingly drained. His breath came in shallow pants as he stared at the young composer before him. Perhaps he was mourning his own past glory. After a long silence, he waved them away. As Victor and Lucien exited, Lucien's gaze landed on a familiar figure approaching. A silver chain mail gleamed under the dim light. The high-ranked knight squire, Corella, strode toward him, his expression grim. Lucien barely had time to greet him before Corella spoke. Lucien, explain why you didn't come to the library this morning. Victor and Elena exchanged puzzled glances. Why would the church concern itself with a single missed morning? Lucien remained calm, his mind swiftly analyzing the situation. Did the church uncover my secret? No, that's unlikely. If they had, they wouldn't have waited until now. I was involved in the witch's incident before. They probably suspect me, but haven't placed me at the top of their list. After a brief pause, he replied, I stayed up late finishing my composition and felt unwell this morning, so I requested leave. I'm feeling much better now. That's all. Corella narrowed his eyes. Did you see a doctor? What was wrong? Can anyone confirm this? No one. I wasn't ill, just exhausted, Lucien answered evenly. I can vouch for him, sir. Victor stepped forward. Every time I complete a composition, I experience the same exhaustion. Corella scrutinized him. And you are? Mr. Victor is Lucien's music teacher, Elena interjected, still astonished that Lucien had composed a piece so quickly. Corella retrieved his quill and noted something in his ledger. Apologies, Mr. Victor, but as Lucien's teacher, your testimony is biased. If no one else can verify his claim, I'll have to take him to the church for a physical examination. Lucien remained composed, rapidly considering his options. After a brief silence, a new voice interrupted. I can confer his account. I am Baron Othello, director of the association. Othello emerged from his office, drawn by the commotion. Lucien just completed his first composition, a remarkable piece. He poured his heart and soul into it. Though Othello disliked Lucien's unconventional style, he acknowledged his talent. Moreover, the upcoming concert and the association needed him. Corella nodded, making another note. With your statement, Baron, I believe my work here is done. Truthfully, Corella doubted Lucien was the suspect. According to the Inquisition's reports, they sought a sorcerer of at least the third circle. There was no way an unknown young man, a mere novice 3 months ago, could have become a formidable sorcerer so quickly. Furthermore, Lucien's name wasn't even on the church's primary suspect list. With a noble vouching for him, Corella knew better than to escalate the matter. Annoying a baron before securing knighthood would be a grave mistake. As Corella departed, Lucien exhaled in relief. Don't let this distract you, Othello warned before retreating into his office. Lucien, Elena exclaimed, eyes wide. Did Mr. Othello just say you composed your own music? Holy! Lucien simply nodded with a small smile. What's going on here? Wolf's voice rang out as he descended the stairs. Why are you here, Victor? Nothing important, Victor replied. I just discussed modifying the symphony lineup with Mr. Othello. Wolf's expression darkened. A new piece? Impossible. You were desperate just hours ago. Wait, how did Othello approve a change? Did he really allow it? Victor smirked. We met his expectations. Wolf scoffed. In mere hours? That's absurd. If the truth angers you, too bad. Victor's tone was light but firm. And for the record, it's not my work, it's my students. You once claimed a pauper could never become a musician. Lucien just proved you wrong. Wolf threw his head back in laughter. Are you serious, Victor? This guy only started learning music 3 months ago, and now you expect me to believe he composed something worthy of Psalm Hall? If that's true, I'll fulfill my promise. I'll stop composing and stick to music criticism. But if you're lying, you owe me an apology. Victor met his gaze. If I were you, I wouldn't speak too soon, Wolf. You can scoff now, but wait for the concert. Then you'll see Lucien's work in the library. Wolf's amusement faded. He eyed Lucien skeptically before muttering, You're all delusional. I'll be there to watch your downfall. Let's see if you make me eat my words. As Wolf stormed off, Victor shook his head. Arrogance breeds prejudice, and prejudice makes people fools. Lucien, rest today. We'll start tomorrow. I'll speak to Mr. Hank about borrowing you for a while. Still drained, Lucien nodded and bid Victor farewell. Grabbing his umbrella, he left the association with Elena. Why are you staring at me, Elena? Lucien asked, uncomfortable under her gaze. Honestly, you don't feel like the same Lucien I knew before. I always thought you were talented, but I never imagined you'd compose something both Victor and Othello would admire. Lucien shrugged. I guess inspiration struck. Maybe my past experiences played a part. Elena, unfamiliar with how long compositions usually took, tilted her head. Maybe you really are a genius. I always believed in you, Lucien. Don't forget me when you become a great musician. Lucien chuckled. Of course not. As he left, Elena remained standing, murmuring to herself, Why is he so talented? At dinner, Joel teased Lucien about his refined attire, joking about his sudden transformation into a gentleman. Afterward, Lucien returned home and collapsed in a bed, sleeping until 9 at night. When he awoke, he felt significantly better. Though he was eager to begin making revenant dust, he knew patience was necessary. Taking another dose of storm, he felt reinvigorated. Tonight, he would refine his spiritual power under the stars. With luck, he would become a true magic apprentice by dawn. Advancing to a junior apprentice would allow him to cast another spell, slightly enhance his spiritual recovery, and improve his resistance to mind magic. Lucien closed his eyes, feeling the energy course through him. Soon, he would step into a new realm of power.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
The starry sky was deep and dark. Again, Lucien was using the power of the star to refine his spiritual power in the meditation world. Among all the stars, Lucien's host star was the brightest one, and also the easiest one for him to control. The light of the star slowly covered Lucien's soul. Lucien could feel his soul was being nurtured by the star, and his spiritual power was improving. With the help of Storm, Lucien was more energetic than ever, so his progress was rapid. Soon he felt his soul was filled with power. It seemed like the power was outstretching his soul to reach the stars. For the first time, Lucien realized that his soul could be solidified with power. Finishing the meditation, the illusion of the starry sky also disappeared. Lucien's mind was more sober and clearer than ever, and he knew he had become a junior apprentice. Although the change in his soul was too tiny to be observed by other people, Lucien's soul could now better withstand mind magic, recover from common injuries twice faster than before, and be more alert to the surroundings. However, the damage to his body from taking Storm and achieving the breakthrough was also obvious. Soon Lucien felt exhausted again. Lucien knew that he had to become a real sorcerer to employ certain spells prolonging his lifespan, or he would probably die in his early 60s. In the following several days, with Lucien's help, Victor successfully refined Fate and rewrote it into a piece of symphony work. After countless times of practicing, and also with the support of Rhine, finally, their playing impressed Mr. Othello. Mr. Othello's applause lasted for a while in the music hall. It's an awesome piece of work. It's going to make a stir in the audience. Victor, you really have a good student. And you, Lucien, Othello turned around. You're indeed talented. But remember, becoming famous at such young age can be risky. Othello slightly shook his head, still feeling disappointed that Lucien would not devote himself to religious music, and then he left. I think what Othello said was right, Lucien. Victor seemed to be a bit concerned. You'll be facing lots of pressure, mostly because of me. Please do not worry, Mr. Victor. Lucien comforted him. I'll be driven by pressure, and you know I can handle it pretty well. Lucien had his own plan. If he could really become famous, he would be able to meet more people from higher status. It would be very beneficial for him to get some precious magic materials such as moonlight rose dust, and to earn more thales to support himself. I do believe in you, Victor nodded. And after the concert, your top priority will be practicing piano, which will definitely be your most important skill as a good musician. I'll try my best to help you stay focused. Then, Victor switched the topic. If you want, Lucien, you can invite some of your families or friends to the concert. Really? But I heard that one ticket for a Psalm Hall concert is worth at least a thale. It's like a whole year's saving for a common family. Lucien felt it was too good to be true. Yes, it is, but you've made a great contribution to the concert, so you deserve this. Victor smiled. The leading musician, the conductor, and the chief instrumentalist of a Psalm Hall concert always have some extra tickets for their families and friends. It's pretty nice, isn't it? It's awesome, Mr. Victor. Thanks a lot. Lucien was very excited, as he still remembered Uncle Joel's music dream. Can I bring 5 people there? Lucien was thinking about Uncle Joel, Auntie Elisa, John, Ivan, and Elena. Well, it seems like you relate pretty well to people, Lucien. Victor grinned. I got this covered. No worries. Seriously, the Psalm Hall? The one in Alto? Elisa could not believe her ears. Yes, it is. Will you go there? Lucien asked the family again with a smile on his face. For sure we will, Lucien. Joel was feeling very excited but also confused. But we are not qualified for going there, are we? I thought only families and friends of the musicians of the concert were invited. Come on, Dad. Lucien is Mr. Victor's student. Ivan's eyes were gleaming with excitement. Oh my God, I'm going to be the envy of all the kids in Audiobook. Actually, I helped Mr. Victor with a piece of music work for the concert, so I can invite some of my families and friends. Lucien was a bit shy to admit. What? Joel's fork dropped on the table. You did? As a bard, he seriously understood how hard composing was. Lucien did not explain directly. I know it's pretty unexpected, Uncle Joel, but you will see. Now our little Evan's got his own secret. Joel laughed. All right, we'll wait and see. And before that, we need to rent some decent clothes. Sure, we'll tell John as well. Elisa's face was glowing with pride. I really hope we'll be able to come. Saturday, 8 o'clock in the evening. The Psalm Hall. Decent coaches with assorted family insignias gathered in front of the hall. Some of them were luxury, and some of them were simple but tasteful, but all were pulled by the strong and fine horses called Dragon Scale. Finely dressed ladies and gentlemen came out of the coaches, took over the music list for tonight, and started greeting each other. It's such a pleasure to see you here, sir. I wish you had a pleasant trip coming back to Alto from your manor. A middle-aged man slight bowed to the earl with red hair. The other nobles around him were also being very respectful, since the earl was the head of one of the most dominant families in Alto, the Hayne family, and was also Felicia's uncle. Adat Novelbin Adat. Mr. Victor is my niece's music teacher. For sure I should attend the concert. Earl Hayne smiled. Besides, there are many different issues going on in Alto recently. It is my duty to come back and serve the Grand Duke. Earl Hayne was in his 50s, but as a level 3 Grand Knight with the blessing of fire, no one could really tell his age based on his appearance. And his son, Harrington, was an outstanding young man who just became a level 6 Radiant Knight in his early 30s and consolidated the family status. Other nobles around were all nodding with compliments. Taking over the music list, and quickly glancing over it. Hayne noticed the name on the list, Lucian Evans? Since when did Victor have such a student who can already compose? Although I haven't seen Felicia for a while, a noble lady named Yvette wondered. She never mentioned a student whose name's Lucian several months ago when we were on vacation. Well, let's wait and see then. Lord Hayne started walking to the hallway. He unbuckled his sword and handed it to the guard, letting them check his other personal belongings. Since the Grand Duke would be here tonight as well, the security check must be strict. At the same time, the church laid a very large magic-blocking circle covering the whole psalm hall, in which almost all the supernatural magic spells, except legendary spells, were completely blocked. The blocking circle has been the church's greatest work in more than 100 years. After Earl Hayne entered the hallway, 2 fine, dark purple coaches came, followed by 2 lines of guards in red uniforms with golden. The shade of purple on the coaches was elegant and gentle. Both coaches were emblazoned with the same coat of arms, a strong armored arm grabbing a silver shield, surrounded by many bright purple violets together with fortress-like patterns. It was the coat of arms of Orvard family, which was called the Family of Violet and also the Shield of Truth. The 2 coaches stopped in front of the long red carpet. Nobles who had already entered the hall left their seats and came outside again, following Count Hayne and Count Rafati to welcome the Grand Duke, while the musicians were standing in the distance to show their respect. A tall young lady with bright purple hair got off the coach first in her elegant black evening dress. Her deep eyes were purple like a dream. Her eyebrows were heavier and longer than common ladies, and her nose was high and straight, which matched perfectly with her pink, bloom-like lips. The young lady was gorgeous, and her beauty was unique. Her beauty was of vitality, confidence, and heroic spirit. If it was appropriate to compare Miss Sylvia to the lily, who was gentle and elegant, the young lady would be a flourishing violet, lively and passionate. This young lady was the well-known Violet Countess, Natasha, and the middle-aged woman that Lucian saw last time was standing by Natasha's side. As a level 5 Grand Knight, Natasha was half-head taller than most men. She quickly walked to the other coach and supported her father, the Grand Duke, with his hand, to get off. Orvard also had purple hair, but much lighter than his daughters. In his early 60s, the Grand Duke looked weaker than his peers. When he was younger, Orvard was not as gifted as Natasha, therefore, he had to rely on the many secret potions provided by the church and the family in order to awaken his blessing, and then he became a level 2 knight. His health had been damaged by the potions in the early years, and the loss of his wife and the eldest son in the following years were also devastating to him. Even with all the sufferings, Orvard was still very handsome and attractive. His love towards his late wife was well known and touching. Many years before, Orvard fell in love with the only princess of the Kingdom of Home across Storm Strait when he was staying there as an ambassador. They overcame countless difficulties together and finally got married. In the following years, he gave all his love to his wife and never had any affair. The love story was still being sung by many bards until today. Supported by Natasha, the Grand Duke got off the coach and walked towards the red carpet. In his eyes, the sacred psalm hall never changed in his memory, and then he started thinking about his whole life. After so many years, Natasha was now his only concern. Indeed, he was very proud of his daughter, but also felt worried, since Natasha had an even stronger personality than many men. In front of the splendid and magnificent hall, the nobles were saluting the Grand Duke and the princess, showing their great respect. Orvard was smiling to the nobles in his grave and dignified bearing, while Natasha was slightly nodding to them. Even Lucian could tell from a distance that although the princess was more than used to all of these noble manners, she was not much interested in them. However, when she later found Sylvia standing among the nobles, a big and lovely smile appeared on her face. Lucian saw Natasha was slightly bowing to Sylvia with her right hand on her chest, which was a typical male greeting. That's weird. If I'm not mistaken, there is definitely something between Princess Natasha and Ms. Sylvia. Lucian did not want to gossip about it, but still felt a bit sorry for the noble gentleman present. After all, both Sylvia and Natasha were both very attractive and charming. I suggest we go inside and get seated first, Your Majesty. Count Hain grinned after saluting the Grand Duke respectfully. Let's leave some free space to the young people. His son, Viscount Harrington, was talking to Princess Natasha. Harrington was a nice-looking and enthusiastic young man. The concert for tonight was important, and so was the socializing part. Orvert only took a quick glance at the young man without too much hope. We should wait a bit. I believe Cardinal Sard will be here tonight as well. Hearing the name, many nobles standing close by stopped talking, looking rather surprised. Sard, the Saint Cardinal, the presider of the church in the Duchy of Orvret, member of the Episcopal Conference, was known for almost living in seclusion. It was very unexpected that he was attending the concert tonight, which reminded many of the nobles present of the evil ritual previously conducted in Baron Lawrence's house. At this time, a simple coach with the Saint Truth badge on it stopped in front of the hall. Everyone there could guess it was Sard's coach. Being helped by a young knight, an old man in his white robe got off the coach. He looked very kind with his totally white hair, just like a loving grandpa. Walking with firm and steady steps, Sard was still in pretty good health. No one could really tell he was actually already over 200 years old. As the old cardinal walked closer, Lucien suddenly felt a warm air gently breezing in his spirit, like his soul was basking in the holy light. Lucien was very surprised with how powerful the old man's spiritual power was. When his spiritual power got totally blocked by the magic circle laid by the church, the power of the old man's soul was still this influential. He had actually heard Sard's name before, since he was like a legend in this world. In that moment, Lucien finally saw the legend with his own eyes. It was said that among all the cardinals in the St. Truth Church, only about 10 of them were Saint Cardinals. According to Lucien's knowledge, taking those people, including the greatest knight commanders, leaders of the Inquisition, and the monks into consideration, there could be no more than 30 people in this world who had this kind of power like Sard did. Standing close to Lucien, Rhine narrowed his eyes and wrinkled his brows in concentration as if something was too burning bright for him. Lucien noticed Rhine's difference and turned to look at him, and his eyes just met Rhine's in that moment. The corner of Rhine's mouth quirked up, putting a casual smile on his face. At it novel benedet. It was not the first time that Lucien noticed Rhine was behaving in a weird way. However, Lucien knew that tonight was not a proper time for solving the many questions about Rhine in his mind. When Cardinal Sard entered the hallway, following the knight manner, Orvret kissed Sard's right hand respectfully with his knees slightly bent. "Only truth lives forever," said the Grand Duke. It looked like religious authority was still above imperial power in Alto. "It's very nice to see you, Your Majesty. I'm glad to see that you're still doing this great. And I'm glad to see our lovely little Natasha is an outstanding knight now." Sard held Orvert's arm and smiled lovingly. The Grand Duke and the Cardinal walked into the concert hall hand in hand, with Natasha holding Sard's arm on the other side slightly behind them. They were followed by the nobles walking in the strict rank rules. "Well, it's time to get prepared in the backstage." Victor smiled. "Lucien, you may want to wait here for your friends and lead them to their seats later." Lucien nodded and watched Victor and Rhine leaving. Soon Felicia, Lot, and Herodotus went into the hall as well, and they would be sitting in the good seats assigned for their families. Close to the hallway, only Athy and Lucien were still waiting there. Athy was waiting for Victor's relatives, and Lucien was waiting for his friends. A moment later, a plain and fully loaded coach came. Ivan was the first one getting off the coach, followed by his elder brother John. Ivan looked very adorable in his little suit, while John was the same, tall and handsome, whose blonde hair was shining in the light. Joel and Elisa got off the coach as well. Lucien felt Annie Elisa's dress was pretty tight for her, but her happy smile made her look much younger than usual. Seeing the whole family, Lucien smiled without knowing. "I thought you wouldn't come." Lucien playfully hit John on his shoulder. The two buddies had not seen each other for a while. "Come on." John also hit Lucien back cheerily. "Your first music work will be played in the Psalm Hall. As your best friend, how can I miss it? By the way, Lucien, I have a good news too." John hugged Lucien and patted him on the back. "I'm a high-rank knight squire now." "Wow, that's awesome, John. Good for you." Lucien grinned. At this time, Elena also arrived. In her long, light yellow dress, Elena looked like a lovely angel tonight. Good for you too, Lucien. Joel took a glance at Elena and nudged Lucien slightly. She's adorable. No, no, we're just friends. Lucien was a bit shy and embarrassed. Then Lucien led them to the west stand. It was much smaller than the other stands and could only seat 20 people. The best seats belonged to the distinguished counts and above. After taking his seat, Orveret slightly leaned forward and asked the cardinal, "Your Eminence, is there any progress in investigating Baron Lawrence's case?" Although the city guards and the intelligence division of the duchy were also looking into this thing, they could never compete with the great pastors from the Inquisition who claimed that they could hear from the God of Truth. Well, Cardinal Sard was watching the orchestra being prepared on the stage in the front, with a casual smile on his face. We believe that it has something to do with the Duke in the Hell. His predecessor was sealed somewhere under the Dark Mountain Range by the ancient magic empire, and he's always been trying to find his predecessor and absorb the power. I thought he could have been more careful. Natasha joined their conversation, and we heard that some sorcerers were involved in it as well. That's true. Sard nodded. God revealed to me that they do have other plans. So we're still gathering more information, especially looking up the ancient documents from Sylvanas' magic empire. As for the sorcerers, there are just several apprentices with a sorcerer coming from the headquarters of the Congress of Magic. He calls himself Professor, but he's only a 3rd or 4th circle sorcerer, so we don't have to worry too much about them. The headquarters of the Congress of Magic. The Grand Duke and the Princess asked at the same time with wonder. Sard seemed to be a bit slow, and his eyes were dull. However, his smile was still very gentle and nice. He did not respond to Orveret and Natasha's question immediately, but followed his own pace to tell the story. Several months ago, some of our night watchers successfully targeted a sorcerer from the Congress, which is very rare, since most of them who came to Alto before never stayed here long, not to mention trying to contact the many hiding sorcerers in Alto. After all, their shared goal was to find the remains of the ancient magic empire in the Dark Mountain Range. Well, Orveret rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Maybe they were also trying to have more sorcerers and sorceresses in Alto to know and join their Congress in order to grow and expand. As far as I know, that's something that the Congress has been working on for more than 200 years. As a pious believer, the Grand Duke definitely knew much more about sorcerers than most other people did. Several nobles sitting behind were paying close attention to what Sard, the Grand Duke, and the Princess were talking about. Their faces looked odd, as if there was something on their mind, but all of them decided to remain silent. "You're right, Your Highness." Sard adjusted his sitting position a bit and continued. Unfortunately, the night watchers failed to catch him alive, and the sorcerer destroyed himself. Then he took a glance at the tall and strong Saint Knight standing beside him, letting the knight continue with the rest of the explanation. Only the church knights can be called Saint Knights. The knight's face was fully covered by his protection mask, through which his dull voice came. We think the sorcerer who called himself Professor came here for the same reason, and maybe also to investigate what happened to the last sorcerer. Sitting in and leaning against her seat, Natasha looked pretty relaxed. Now she was looking in another direction with a hint of a smile on her face. "It seems like you know a lot about what the sorcerers are doing in Alto, don't you?" She was not being disrespectful. Actually, her piousness was acknowledged before by Sard himself, and her teacher was the chief commander of Sword Brothers serving the church. However, except when she was praying in front of the God of Truth, Natasha was always quite casual about almost everything. "Your Highness, the church has been tracking them for years, and the sorcerers never hid themselves in front of the church perfectly." The knight lowered his head. "So did the so-called professor. Some clues are showing that he follows the contemporary magic system, and that's why we speculate that Professor is from the Congress. It seems like he does not really trust the sorcerers in Alto. He was being very careful, so although we have 2 people spying on them, what we know about Professor is still relatively limited. The church decided to be more cautious. In the hundreds of years in Alto, a few sorcerers betraying their belief and turning to work for the church was not something new. Knowing that the sorcerer groups in Alto were too small to cause them much trouble, instead of destroying them all at once, the church decided to leave them in Alto in order to play a long game with the Congress of Magic. Well, At this point, the mysterious professor is not a big deal yet, as far as I'm concerned. What makes me feel worried is Argent Horn. I wonder what they are planning in alto. Orveret cupped his chin in his hand. As you wish, your majesty. The knight slightly bowed. We will leave the junior night watchers to trace the case of Professor, and the main force of the church keeps investigating the heresy. At Novelben at. Still haven't found Rosen Aaron? Twirling her long purple hair with her finger breathed. Not yet. We're trying our best, answered the Saint Knight. The orchestra was ready. At this time, a young, purple-haired man entered the balcony. His facial features were a bit similar to that of Natasha, but he was even taller than her. His suit was emblazoned with the coat of arms of the Violet family. The young man nodded to the nobles in the balcony, smiling. Then he walked toward the first row of seats in the front, saluting the Grand Duke and the Cardinal respectfully in the knight manner. "My dear cousin, you're late." Natasha waved to him. This young man was the nephew of the Grand Duke, the chief commander of Alto's city guard, Count Verdi. "Sorry." He sat down relatively close to Natasha. "Just got some news about Argent Horn, but it turned out to be quite useless. Lucian Evans, the composer of Fate? I never heard this name before." Count Verdi, at the same time, was also quite famous in the music field. "Interesting. I don't know this name either," said the Grand Duke. Hearing Verdi's comment, both Orveret and Sard picked up the lists. "The name of the symphony is Fate. I bet this Lucian is a pretty brave and creative composer." Sard responded kindly. "I don't really have a preference between the two music trends." Natasha grinned. "I happen to know something about this Lucian. Yesterday, Baron Othello came to me and asked for the permission to replace the third piece of music on the list with a new symphony. And here it is, from this Victor's new student, Lucian Evans, who just started to learn music 3 months ago." 3 months ago? That's insane. Verdi slightly frowned. Pursuing to be perfect, Verdi was strict with himself, and knowing the fact that there was someone even more talented than him was definitely not pleasant. "Well, unfortunately, it looks like this guy is pretty talented, even more than you are, although you started to learn music at 8, and at 9 you were already able to compose. But seriously, don't worry, Verdi. He cannot compete with you. I met the guy the other day, and he looked like a woman. I'm quite curious to see what he can do." "Well, some people are just geniuses, which is not fair per se, but it is the intention of God," Sard commented. And that reminded Natasha of the story of Sard. Sard was not a genius, ever. Since the first day he entered Alto Monastery, he was never able to compete with his smart peers. However, in the end, it was Sard who became the Saint Cardinal, although it took him more than 100 years. So he often told the followers, the faith in God has nothing to do with talent. "Well, we'll wait and see." Orveret laughed. "What Natasha said makes me feel curious now, too." At this time, Victor walked on the stage with a baton in his hand. Firstly, he bowed in the direction of the Grand Duke's balcony in a solemn manner. Then he bowed to the other nobles and musicians. Finally, he turned around and lowered his head, staring at the baton in his hand. The playing started. Orveret closed his eyes and smiled. This is the best one among Victor's previous work. It's just beautiful. Everyone stopped talking and immersed themselves in the music. Looking into each other's eyes, Lucian, Lot, and Felicia smiled together behind the backstage. They could tell Victor was in a very good form. Now, they had become real classmates, if not yet friends. The first symphony lasted for about 40 minutes, and it went very well. During the break, some of the audiences expressed their concern that if the first symphony was already the best one among Victor's previous work, the rest of them might not be that good. But Victor proved that they were wrong. The second piece of symphony was actually even better. It was lively, vivid, and full of life, like a cool summer breeze, like an autumn field. At the end of it, Orveret applauded for a long time with satisfaction. Victor never stops making progress. "He's awesome," commented the Grand Duke. "That's true. It's soothing and beautiful," echoed Verdi, although in his mind, he did not really appreciate this kind of country-style symphony. "Well, it's good, but I think Victor is capable of doing an even better job. I didn't feel his passion in it." "There's still space for improvement," said Natasha. "My little niece mentioned before that the composition of the second symphony took Victor around 2 to 3 years. After knowing that he would be holding a concert in the Psalm Hall, He spent another 3 months in my younger brother's manor for improvement, and it indeed reminded me of the boundless, ripe wheat field in my hometown. Smiling, Earl Hayne introduced the story behind the symphony to the Grand Duke and the Princess, feeling slightly grateful to his niece, Felicia, who he never had fondness for in the past. Since the eldest son of the previous Earl died in a fight against the heretics, a contest started between the second and the youngest son of the Hayne family. At that time, because the second son, who was also the current Earl Hayne, had not awakened his blessing yet, and Felicia's father was much better favored by their father, the present Earl was in a great anxiety almost all the time. At it novel Benedet. Then a favorable turn came to the second son, who awoke his blessing. Furthermore, his son Harrington grew into a very talented young man who wasn't even inferior to Princess Natasha and Earl Verdi. The second son successfully inherited the title and all the land the Hayne family had. I feel the same way. Orvert nodded. This piece of symphony reminded me of the beautiful country life. Maybe you're right, Natasha, but the concert is already very impressive. Let's wait and see the following 2 pieces of work. The last symphony is from his student, though. I can't believe a new learner who just started learning music 3 months ago can compose a symphony, and I don't have much expectation on the young lad's so-called talent. Earl Rafati also joined their conversation, a very handsome man seemingly to be in his early 30s. Uncle Hart, I believe you're the last person who should claim that talent doesn't mean anything. Natasha laughed in a very non-noble lady way. You awoke the blessing of sun when you were 10 and became an 8th Circle senior rank Holy Magus in your 60s. No one is more promising than you are for finally becoming a legendary Holy Magus. The seemingly young Earl Rafati was actually way elder than he looked like, and he was a very powerful Holy Magus. Holy Magi were people who awoke their blessing and therefore were granted with magic power. To differentiate the blessed spellcasters from the notorious sorcerers, people called them Magi. There was also a reason for the great power of the Rafati family. While other noble families were relating to each other by intermarriage, the Rafati family insisted on royal incest to make sure the great family power and the purest blood could be inherited by their younger generations. Although many deformed babies were thus born, the family also had many genius members such as the present Earl. Verdi commented seriously, Uncle Hart's talent is a gift from God. It's different. So, is musical talent, I heard. Natasha smiled. Seriously, I'm quite looking forward to Lucien's work. No matter if it's good or bad, it's going to be interesting. The 4th piece of symphony should be the most impressive and outstanding one for tonight's concert. I hope Victor knows what he's doing. Rafati slightly shook his head. Aside Lucien's work, I'm also quite excited about the new musical instrument, the piano. Natasha switched the topic to the following piano concerto. I wonder how piano performs compared with harpsichord. Sitting on the chair, Verdi's back was straightened in a serious manner. Now Victor was more relaxed, knowing that his first 2 pieces of symphonies were acknowledged by the Grand Duke. During the break, he was chatting with his students casually, while Ryan appeared to be more silent than usual. Soon it was time for Victor to go back to the stage. This time Ryan would be his designated conductor to direct the orchestra, and Victor would be the one who played the new musical instrument, the piano. The sound of the piano was rich and resounding. The first note of the piano concerto instantly caught the whole audience's attention. This was a piece of concerto with religious profundity. Impressive, Verdi commented with satisfaction and then closed his eyes to listen carefully. The high sound quality of piano fitted perfectly well with the solemnity and sacredness of the religious music. Several higher pitches were also handled very well by the piano. The whole psalm hall was immersed in the majestic melody. When the concerto came to its end, Cardinal Sard crossed himself and said, "This is an eulogy for God." The success of this concerto is accomplished by this brand new musical instrument. It is awesome. It is the best keyboard instrument ever. Natasha gasped with admiration. Compared with piano, harpsichord and clavichord are just like toys for girls. You are a girl as well, Natasha. Orvert's brows were slightly frowned. The Grand Duke was about to applause when he heard his daughter's improper comment. Regarding her father with reverence, Natasha mumbled, "Even so, I'm still the most special girl among them all, no inferior to any man. Hearing Natasha's murmuring, a meaningful smile appeared on Verdi's face, but he did not say anything. I saw you, Verdi. Natasha straightened her back instantly and stared at him seriously. You don't think so, do you? Or you want to fight outside? Well, I don't want any trouble. Verdi was still smiling. All right, Natasha. Symphony of Fate is coming. The Grand Duke was trying to change the topic between the two. Taking a glance at the stage, Natasha squinted at Verdi. My dear cousin, I believe Lucien's work will be better than all of yours. Well, at least I have my music works to be compared. While you, my dear Natasha, you're not good at composing at all. With regard to the talent of composing, I believe I'm way more gifted than you are. Verdi instantly fought back. That's really true, isn't it? Well, then how strange it is that none of your brilliant work has ever been played in the Psalm Hall, while a random guy who just started learning music 3 months ago somehow managed to do it. Natasha put on a rather surprised look. I just don't want to. Verdi gnashed his teeth, feeling sort of speechless. The guy named Lucien. His work can never be better than mine. Ah, I heard what you said. Natasha laughed. Let's see what will happen if his work indeed is better than yours. The Grand Duke also nodded, feeling very expectant like the other nobles, except Wolf. Wolf's face was almost twisted together. Although the success of Victor's concert would not do any harm to him, in Wolf's mind, it was Victor who took away the success he deserved. So Wolf was going to pay very close attention to every single note of the following symphony, finding the tiniest flaws and putting all of them on music criticism. On the small west balcony, Elisa and Joel's hands were grabbing together tightly. Even John was feeling sort of nervous. All of them were waiting for Symphony of Fate, the last piece of work tonight. Standing in front of the orchestra, with the baton in his hand again, Victor's mind churned. He thought back to the failure of his first concert, the great success of the second concert, the many memorable moments between Winnie and him, Winnie's affectionate gaze toward the end of her life, as well as the encouragement from Lucien, Ryan, and the rest of his students. Winnie, can you hear me? Victor knew he was ready, and he slowly lifted the baton. The moment when Victor waved his baton, the beginning of the symphony shocked every audience present. The first few bars of the symphony were like the loud knocks at the door that instantly woke everyone up. Orveret, Natasha, and Verdi opened their eyes at the same time with great surprise. It was fate that was knocking the door in an irresistible and fierce manner. The rhythm, the tone, and the accents falling on the beats gripped everyone's heart. No one could hide from the trials of life. The theme of the symphony was revealed directly, without any foreshadowing or implication. The horns took place before a second theme was introduced, symbolizing the fierce struggling between fate and will. As the first and the second theme interweaved with each other, the audience experienced great tension and pressure, as if they were personally on the battlefield, although they were only sitting in their seats. The reactions of the audience varied. Grabbing the armrests, the nobles such as the Grand Duke and Wolf, who had never experienced the cruelty of war in person, almost couldn't stand the fear in their hearts. While Knight Vin became very engulfed by the memories of the deep fear and horror that he suffered back in the days when he was fighting against the evil creatures and the heretics. Sard remained relatively calm, but his eyes were open. This time his eyes were no longer dull. Instead, they were bright and sharp. He was associating the music work with his own stories back in the day. Facing the tension and the great pressure coming from the symphony, younger nobles such as Verdi and Natasha showed their rising fighting will. Clenching his right fist, Verdi tightened every muscle in his body to be ready for fronting the blows of fate, showing the spirit of the Violet family as the shield of truth. Natasha's body was leaning forward, and her face looked serious but also excited. She wanted a good fight to beat the darkness and the so-called fate. Victor devoted his heart and soul to the conducting. Compared with Lucien's original work, now the symphony was much better developed and even more thrilling. The combination of viola, cello, and woodwind in the second movement gave the audience a short break from the intensity, and soon the third movement again threw them back to the front, encountering the overwhelming fear of darkness. Pain, hope, fear, anger, and so many other feelings mixed together. When the light finally beat the darkness, when the final movement of Great Victory was played in the Psalm Hall, many of the audience spontaneously stood up and cheered with thunderous applause. The Grand Duke gave a long sigh of relief and raised his hand to wave, as if he was cheering for his brave knights and soldiers returning home in triumph. With great excitement as well as satisfaction, Natasha left her seat and walked close to the handrail, staring at the orchestra as if she was still immersed in her own world of music. At Novelbin at leaning comfortably against the back of the seat, Sylvia and the other musicians spontaneously exchanged a look. They could tell the great surprise and admiration in each other's eyes. This young man? He's probably another genius after Gisu and Twal, Sylvia murmured to herself. Joel's family and Elena were cheering and applauding. Although they did not know a lot about music, they felt from the bottom of their hearts that Lucien's work was truly shocking and touching. They had tears in their eyes. Joel was tingling with excitement, feeling that his dream was accomplished by Lucien. He was more than proud, regarding Lucien's success and honor as his own. Grabbing his father's shoulder, John's face flushed with gratification. "Dad, Lucien is such a genius, isn't he? From now on, we can call him Mr. Lucien." Elena couldn't believe what just happened in the hall. After all, when she first met Lucien several months ago, this young man was carrying bags of garbage. Wolf's face turned deathly pale, knowing that he could never deny the greatness of this symphony. And now he finally realized why Victor was willing to have such a pauper as his music student. This poor guy was indeed a genius. Turning his head restlessly in the tumultuous applause, Wolf relied his last bit of hope on the picky nobles and musicians, wishing that at least a couple of them, who always preferred religious music, would show their dislike toward the theme of the symphony. The Grand Duke joined his daughter, walking toward the front of the balcony to applaud warmly. Being led by the Grand Duke and the Princess, the second round of wild applause with the tumultuous ovation burst out, reverberating through the Psalm Hall. Without any doubt, the concert was a great success. After saluting the Grand Duke and the rest of the audience, Victor trotted back and pulled Lucien out from the backstage. Lucien was prepared, so he calmly followed Victor and came to stand in front of all the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, please let me introduce you my student, Lucien Evans." "It is Lucien Evans who composed this great piece of symphony," said Victor loudly to all of the balconies. "What a talent!" The applause from the nobles and the musicians became even louder, showing their great recognition toward this young musician. "Great music. Great young man." Earl Hayne nodded. Even a person who knows nothing about music can feel the greatness of his work. The Grand Duke commented in a loud voice, "Unparalleled. This young man will grow into a great musician." Natasha's mind was full of emotional thoughts. "I was almost speechless. I felt something very unique. I know it's something that I've been always looking for. Lucien, you're the innovator in the history of music." Even Verdi couldn't say anything to refute her at this point. "You got the soul that never yields. God bless you, young man." Slowly, Sard stood up. He looked at Lucien with a loving smile on his face. Among all the people, Wolf was the only one who remained slouching in his seat. He felt too weak to even talk. "Thanks God. This is the gift of God." Lucien saluted the balconies in a gentleman manner, playing his role as a believer with great piety. The great success of the concert would bring him lots of benefits, and one of them would be a higher social status, which was very helpful for him to hide his identity. The guards from the church and the sheriffs of the city would not dare to casually arrest or investigate a musician who had received the recognition from the Grand Duke, the Cardinal, and the Princess. The Cardinal nodded and said to the Grand Duke, "I'm very glad that I attended the concert tonight. All of the music works tonight are great, and Symphony of Fate is especially the most impressive one. Light conquers darkness. The God of Truth empowers us to fight against difficulties. God bless us all. God bless us all." Orvert lowered his head, putting his palm on his chest. On the stage, Victor's eyes were wet with tears. How he wished that Winnie could see all of this in heaven. "How do you feel now, my cousin?" Natasha looked at Verdi and asked pleasantly. This piece of work belongs to Lucien, not you, Natasha. And unfortunately, his talent can never be yours as well. Verdi did not answer directly. Well, actually, the unique theme of his work inspired me a lot. Maybe I should have him to be my music consultant to produce my own music work, said Natasha, tilting her head on one side. His success comes from both of his talent and his life experience. And the accumulation of inspiration and good ideas takes time. I don't think it will work, Natasha. Verdi shrugged his shoulders disapprovingly. Still worth a shot. Lifting her brows, Natasha chuckled. When the nobles were leaving the psalm hall in order, Victor and Lucien came to the backstage. The orchestra members there were still feeling excited. Mr. Victor, Mr. Evans, this is the best concert we've ever attended. Some of the members in the orchestra were also relatively well-known musicians in alto. Although when practicing, they already had a pretty high expectation on this concert, especially on Symphony of Fate. The heated response from the noble audiences and the many famous musicians tonight was still a great surprise for them. Victor was also very excited. He walked toward Ryan, his most intimate comrade in these days, and gave him a big hug. Thank you so much, Mr. Ryan. You helped me with improving the harpsichord. You supported me all the time during the countless times of rehearsal. Without you, this concert could never be this perfect. Although Ryan remained quite silent all the evening, he was also very gratified by the success of the concert. Thank you, Victor. It is my honor to work with you, Mr. Victor, and with Lucien as well. He smiled. Mr. Evans, Thomas, the cellist of the orchestra, hugged Lucien with great enthusiasm. You'll become the most well-known musician in alto, no, on the whole continent. Lucien felt a bit awkward when people, especially the orchestra members, called his surname with respect. Lucien's promising future in music was already widely expected by many of the orchestra members when they first started to rehearse the fourth piece of symphony composed by the young music student of Mr. Victor. Now Lucien's talent was acknowledged by the distinguished nobles in the public. Since the Grand Duke used the word unparalleled to comment on Lucien's music work, and the Princess Natasha directly called Lucien the innovator of the music history, Lucien would definitely become the brightest new star in the field of music very soon. Everyone in the orchestra knew that as long as Lucien could compose another piece of symphony of the same high quality within the following 2 years, his status in the field of music would be completely fastened. If this new trend of music could be popularized in the future, then Lucien would undoubtedly be a high authority. Thus, the orchestra members showed great respect toward Lucien. Lucien hugged the members one by one. Although the status and the income of a musician was way higher than the common players in an orchestra, Lucien was clearly aware of the fact that the full cooperation of the players was also one of the key factors in determining the outcome of a concert. Lucien. Ryan also gave Lucien a big hug. I can imagine that, in the near future, more and more pieces of music work will be composed to express human beings' feelings and emotions, instead of merely praising God. I shall call you Mr. Evans as well, since you are absolutely the pioneer of the new trend. Although Lucien was not used to that intimate way of celebrating, he also did not mind it. Lucien also hugged Ryan. Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Unfortunately, I'm still far away from being a pioneer. After all, even playing piano is still challenging for me. And by the way, your violin playing was awesome, Mr. Ryan, but just lacked some passion. In Lucien's eyes, Ryan was sometimes a bit weird. Taking this chance, Lucien was trying to test Ryan. You're right. Maybe I am too calm most of the time. Ryan released his arms and explained casually. Although Ryan looked pretty lean, Lucien could feel the strength in his arms and his body from the short hug. Lucien was also supposed to hug his classmates. Great work, Lucien. When hugging Lucien, Felicia's face flushed. Lucien's success would bring her lots of benefits as well. She could already picture the scene of she being surrounded by many noble ladies and madams, asking about her talented classmate. I'm proud of having you as my classmate, Lucien. Lot offered Lucien a big hug and congratulated him, while Herodotus remained silent when he was hugging Lucien. A while later, Herodotus said to Lucien in a low voice, "You're something." Victor saved his warmest and biggest hug for Lucien. I don't know how to express to you my thankfulness, Lucien. You're a gift for me from God. Having you as my student is my great blessing. Being your student is my greatest honor, Mr. Victor. said Lucian sincerely. Oh, there's one thing, Victor said to Lucian. You'll get half of the money tonight. Don't say no, Lucian. With the money, you don't have to live in Audieron anymore. Audieron is not safe. As far as Lucian knew, ticket for the concerts held in the Psalm Hall was always in high demand. The ticket revenue tonight was 365 thales, which was quite a lot. 365 thales was 4 times the number of Victor's annual income, while the annual income of a noble knight was only about 3 to 500 thale. According to the regulation of the association, 40% of the ticket income would be contributed to the church, and 30% would be used for the maintenance of the association and the Psalm Hall, as well as paying the whole orchestra. For the remaining 30%, about 110 thales would be Victor's. In other words, Lucian would earn around 30 to 35 thales. 30 to 35 thales equaled several decades of saving for a common person, even a lifelong effort. With the money, Lucian could move to a decent 3-story house in Purple Lily District or a relatively old 2-story house with a small garden in Gisu District. I can't say no. Thank you very much, Mr. Victor, Lucian answered sincerely, as if he could already see the gold coins shining in front of his eyes. With the money, the dust of Moonlight Rose would not be a dream for Lucian anymore. The only problem was that it was not easy to find Moonlight Rose dust. A decent place in a decent area was also what Lucian needed, not only because he wanted a better living condition, but also because of the need to stay away from Audieron, where he got involved with the other sorcerers using the identity Professor. With a bigger house, Lucian could also build a bigger and safer magic lab underground. After the celebration, when Felicia was about to invite everyone present to visit her family's manor tomorrow, the middle-aged lady who always stood by Princess Natasha's side came to the backstage. Lady Camille, Felicia, Lot, and Herodotus heard her story before. They hurriedly saluted her. Victor, Lucian, and the other people present also followed the manor. Mr. Evans, said Lady Camille seriously, Princess Natasha wants you to be her personal music consultant. About an hour each time, twice a week in Ratatia Palace. The pay is very decent, 2 thale a month. Her words instantly turned Lucian into the envy of the people present, even including Victor. Only Rhine's eyes dimmed for a moment. I can't. I'm sorry. Lucian turned down the offer subconsciously. I just started learning music 3 months ago. I'm afraid I'm not qualified for this position, and the success this time might just be a random explosion of my accumulated inspiration. Lucian had another reason that he could not speak out. He was afraid that entering the palace would be too risky and his sorcerer identity might be revealed by the princess, who was a level 5 Grand Knight herself, or this Lady Camille, a Radiant Knight. However, the job was also very alluring. From another perspective, serving Princess Natasha could be his perfect disguise as well. The princess doesn't mind. What Her Royal Highness values is the unique skills you employed in your composition and your understanding toward the new theme of music, said Camille emotionlessly. Would you like to accept the job, Mr. Evans? The other people in the room were looking at Lucian with expectation. Finally, Lucian nodded his head. It would be my pleasure to serve the princess. Thank you, Mr. Evans, Lady Camille said, and then left the backstage. The pay was truly very good. At least before becoming a first circle sorcerer, Lucian wouldn't have to worry with the expenses of buying most of the materials. Also, the job offered Lucian a high social status. It was already 11 in the late night when Lucian left the Psalm Hall. Only few lights were still twinkling along the dark and empty street. Although the daytime in the month of harvest was hot, the rain-swept night was very cool and pleasant. Lucian's mind was refreshed by the cool air. He gradually woke up from the ecstasy and started to plan his next step. If everything went well, Lucian would be leaving Audieron very soon. Thus, he had to clean the underground lab up as soon as possible in case some random tramps would inadvertently enter the shack when there was no one there. Before that, Lucian decided to collect some revenant dust tonight when the lab was still fully equipped, and then he could turn his attention to the search of Moonlight Rose tomorrow. Moonlight Rose was always in high demand and very expensive, since it was the main ingredient of the magic potion which could help a knight squire awaken blessing, and thus become a real knight. As most squires couldn't afford the moonlight rose, some knights would occasionally select their best squires and award them with the dust of the rose. In addition to that, the market of moonlight rose was controlled by the church, the Violet family, and a few other big families, which was also one of the strategies how the big families consolidated their status in the Duchy of Orvret. Lucien was hoping that probably Felicia could help him, since she was a member of the Hain family. Felicia was qualified enough to buy some moonlight roses within her family. What Lucien did not know was that, actually, Felicia had already bought the roses 3 times before, hoping that she could awaken her blessing. However, her hope finally failed, and since then she started to pay her full attention to learning music. Lucien currently had no idea how to ask Felicia to do him a favor without being suspected, which sort of bothered him. If Felicia was not willing to help, then Lucien would have no other choice but to find the black market in Alto or join another secret sorcerer meeting again, which was the last thing Lucien wanted to do for now. 2 simple wagons were waiting in front of the psalm hall in the corner. Uncle Joel and his family, as well as Elena, were waiting for Lucien beside the wagons. Seeing Lucien coming in their direction, Joel waved to him with both of his hands. He came toward Lucien and gave Lucien a big warm hug. "Tonight's like a dream." Joel patted Lucien's back with great joy. "You invited me to the concert and fulfilled my dream. We, and your dad, we are all so proud of you, Lucien." Following Joel, John also hugged Lucien. His arms were shaking a bit, and his voice was trembling. "I knew it. I knew you're something. But your growth is still way beyond my expectation. After all, I thought at least I would become a knight first, haha. Now I gotta work even harder, or I'll fall behind." Lucien was inspired. Maybe he could use John as an excuse for buying Moonlight Rose. After all, Lucien could now afford to buy Moonlight Rose for his close friend John, who was a knight squire, which definitely made sense. And it was part of Lucien's original plan as well. Some of his roses would be a gift for John. Lucien already regarded Joel's family as his own family and John as his most important friend. The support Joel's family offered Lucien meant a lot to him. Now the only problem was how Lucien could persuade Felicia to do him the favor. "My career in music has just started. There's still a long way to go." Lucien smiled. "I'm sure soon you will awake your blessing and become a real knight." "Well, I'm not sure about that yet, Lucien." John shook his head and released his arms. "The first try to awake the blessing is the most likely to succeed. I have to be more prepared for that." "Congratulations, Mr. Evans." Elena hugged Lucien. Her big eyes were blinking with joy. "I'm really flattered, Elena." Lucien grinned. "We are friends. Please don't call me a mister." After sending Elena and Joel's family home, Lucien went back to his shack and lay in bed. About 1 o'clock in the early morning, suddenly Lucien got up. Making sure that it was safe around, Lucien quietly entered his magic lab. It took Lucien an hour to set up some magic traps just in case. Then Lucien took out a tube of blood from a box. At the same time, the magic notebook was open in his spirit library, ready for taking notes at any time. Lucien was hoping that during the process of collecting the revenant dust, he could also gain a better understanding toward the undead creatures. As soon as Lucien opened the tube inscribed with runes, a strong smell of sulfur came into his nose. As if it was alive, the dark blood kept bubbling like lava. Murmuring the awkward-sounding and obscure spell, Lucien connected his spirit with another space dimension. Suddenly, he grabbed the tube and spilled the blood forward. Weirdly, instead of dropping on the ground, the blood suspended in the air and divided into many small drops. The drops of blood moved quickly, and a magic circle took shape in front of Lucien. The whole space of the lab was instantly filled with the stinky smell of blood. Blood fog diffused around the lab. Suddenly, a transparent human figure appeared in the air, of which its face and limbs remained very blurry, but its resentment was so strong that it almost became visible. Although Lucien still did not understand how different space dimensions were connected by spiritual power, the structure of this apprentice summoning spell itself was not complicated. A hole, probably its mouth, appeared on the figure's face, and the vicious revenant started screaming and suddenly leaped at Lucien's throat. Lucien stayed very calm and activated the magic traps around him. The air flows restricted the revenant like ropes and shackled it in the air. Wraith Shackle, an apprentice-level spell. At the same time, transparent walls appeared in the air and surrounded the revenant inside. The surface of the walls was rippling like water as the sound waves of the scream kept hitting the walls. Silence Wall, also an apprentice spell. Although the scream of the revenant was blocked, Lucian still felt a sudden surge of nausea, and he heard someone was screaming in his brain. Quickly, Lucian took down the notes in his spirit library. The scream of revenant transmits in the form of infrasonic waves. High penetrating power. Causes illusion. Lucian hoped that he could know the rough vibration frequency of the waves, but with limited lab equipment, Lucian's note couldn't be more detailed and accurate. Being trapped, the revenant's scream became even crazier, but the scream couldn't bother Lucian anymore. Calmly, Lucian activated the magic circle drawn on the table, from which many golden rays of light immediately scattered. Weight, 21.26 g. Heavier than expected. Power, remain unknown. The information was stored. Then Lucian started to cast different spells on the revenant to see the effects. Immune to Mage Hand. Immune to Acid Splash. Immune to Freezing Rays. Small damage caused by Hohmann's oscillation. Might be because of the intervention of waves or magnetic interference. Minor damage caused by Maria's small flame. Reason unknown. As the experiment went on, the revenant in the air became weaker and weaker, and even more transparent. As if it was afraid of Lucian, the revenant huddled in the corner of the surrounding magic walls. Some instinct remained. Lucian kept recording. Then Lucian cast the spell Illumination. In the light, the revenant became irritated again, but had nowhere to escape. Its resentment gradually disappeared in the light, but rather slowly. Afraid of strong light. Another line of words appeared on the notebook. The experiment finally came to the end. Looking at the very weak revenant huddling in the corner, Lucian shook his head. The summoned revenant was now badly damaged, and soon it disappeared completely. Shiny fine dust slowly fell into the magic circle. 21.25 g. The reason of the weight difference remains unknown. Maybe the consciousness of the revenant also has weight. At novel Benadat. Lucian collected the dust of the revenant in a glass tube, and then slowly tidied up the lab, since it should also be the last time he used it before Lucian moved out. In the morning, Lucian got up early and headed for the association for two reasons. Firstly, Lucian had become Princess Natasha's personal music consultant, so he should quit the librarian job and leave it to someone who really needed it. Secondly, Lucian was too excited to wait another day to get his lovely and shiny Thales. When Lucian arrived at the Musicians' Association, only 2 guards were standing in front of the 5-story building, since most of the believers following the God of Truth usually spent their Sunday morning in the church. At Novel Benadat. Good morning, Mr. Evans. The 2 guards smiled and greeted Lucian. Morning. Lucian nodded, feeling a bit surprised. Since the concert finished late last night, it was quite surprising that the guards were already showing respect to him in this following Sunday morning. Lucian wondered if maybe it was Elena who told the guards, because she was the only one among all the concert audience who needed to work on Sunday. Before Lucian entered the building, he heard they were whispering, 3 months ago, Mr. Evans was still carrying garbage for our association. He asked me to do him a favor looking after his trolley. Now look at him, a musician. I know. The last time I saw him, he was still a music student. Never expected he was such a genius. Elena and Kathy were tidying up the documents behind the counter when Lucian came into the lobby. Both of them greeted Lucian with respect. Good morning, Mr. Evans. Elena winked at Lucian with a sweet smile on her face, and Kathy seemed to be a bit nervous. Good morning, Elena. Morning, Kathy. Lucian asked with curiosity. What keeps you girls this busy this morning? I'm glad you asked. Elena answered in excitement. Lucian, you know what? Your name is on both the latest music criticism and symphony news. What? I thought the next issue for both of them would be released at the end of the month. Now Lucian was really surprised. That's because your music work is so amazing. Elena was very proud of Lucian. Many musicians were deeply touched by your Symphony of Fate, and they worked overnight on their reviews. The association thus decided to issue both of the newspapers in advance this month. Now we have the first copies. Mr. Evans, do you want one? Asked Kathy with respect and curiosity. Well, I think I should. Lucian smiled and poured out 20 fells from his money bag. From hard saving, Lucian's small money bag finally bulged a bit. What did they say, Lucian? Elena still couldn't read very well. Kathy and I are really curious. Picking up the latest music criticism, Lucian saw a painting of the Psalm Hall and 2 lines of black bold words. Ladies and gentlemen, hats off to the real genius. Othello. Lucian read Mr. Othello's comment to Elena and Kathy, and the girls' eyes were filled with reverence. Turning the page, the first review article titled Music with Soul, Salute to Symphony of Fate. As a gift from God, music encourages us to continuously progress toward a better future. However, in the past 300 years, the main role that the solemn and sacred religious music was playing was never challenged on the stage of music, since other music themes were always hiding behind the scenes and paled in comparison with it. Until we met Symphony of Fate, a great piece of music composed by Lucian Evans and first played on Mr. Victor's concert held in the Psalm Hall last night, I finally realized what is the most indispensable quality of a masterpiece. Music is emotion. Music is feelings. Without emotion and feelings, without soul, music can never be deeply moving to people. And the young musician Lucian Evans knows clearly about this. The 4 movements of Symphony of Fate are connected by a consistent faith all along. Hope and persistence can conquer any difficulty. It is the most exciting, encouraging, and touching symphony I have ever appreciated. Lucian Evans, without any doubt, is a genius. His music talent shocked Alto, and I believe he will shock the whole continent in the future. As soul is to life, so is emotion to music. The review article was pretty long, which was more about expressing feelings instead of professional analyzing. The reason this article ranked the first was that it was written by the Grand Duke, Orveret. Wow, the Grand Duke really likes your symphony, exclaimed Elena in surprise and joy. I heard Princess Natasha also contributed, said Kathy politely. Mr. Evans, can you please read her article to us? I know the princess is very good at reviewing music works. Sure, answered Lucian, feeling a bit nervous to read the princess's comment. Natasha's article ranked second place in music criticism following her father's work, which titled A Future Trend, The Music Revolution Led by Symphony of Fate. A great piece of symphony with magnificent theme and touching emotion running through. The talented musician, Lucian Evans, creatively used the 4 stress accents to form the first bar as the beginning of Symphony of Fate. Each of the 4 movements of the symphony was relatively independent, but yet connected to each other, highlighting the shared theme. Light would conquer darkness and courage would overcome difficulty. The flexible and skilled utilization of assorted music instruments enriched the symphony's emotion world and grabbed every audience's heart last night. Call it heroism, call it persistence, call it night spirit. I was deeply touched by the great work. The short bar, which is composed of the 4 stress accents, is still striking my heart, as if it synchronizes with my heartbeat. This young, unfettered music genius, Mr. Evans, revealed a brand new music world in front of us, where new music skills should be explored and new music themes should be developed. Great innovator, great pioneer. Lucian's face blushed when he was reading the article. Flipping through this music criticism, Lucian found that 29 out of the 40 articles here were music reviews about Symphony of Fate. Some of them analyzed its theme, and some of them skills. The other several articles were about Victor's piano concerto and the concert in general. Urged by Elena and Kathy, Lucian briefly glanced through the latest symphony news and found the same situation. All of the articles were about either Victor or himself. Wait, I know this name. Elena pointed her finger at a name under the first review article on Symphony News, Christopher Gionis. Christopher Gionis was the president of the Musicians Association, and also the most well-known musician in alto, who composed more than 100 great music works. Jonas was respected as a living music legend. Here was Jonas's comment. If you haven't heard Symphony of Fate, you heard no music in your life. Wow, except exclaiming, Elena and Kathy had no idea how to express their admiration to Lucian. A while later, Elena said to Lucian, I'm sure a few months later, you'll become one of the most renowned young musicians throughout the continent. Without saying anything, Lucian smiled and slightly shook his head. Then he left for Mr. Hank's office on the 3rd floor. Congratulations, Evans. Hank rose from his seat behind the desk, walked toward Lucian, and gave him a hug. Thank you, Mr. Hank. Lucian smiled. I'm here to quit my librarian's job. Of course, I expected so. Hank agreed without hesitation, and then he took out a money bag. According to Mr. Victor, this is yours. The money bag was not big, but quite heavy, in which 33 gold coins were fascinatingly weighing the money bag, although most of the time Lucian was able to stay quite calm. Now he was a bit thrilled. Well, I could be quite a money grubber sometimes. Lucian mocked himself a bit in mind. Lucian was aware that there was supposed to be 34 gold coins in the bag, but he did not say anything about it. And of course Hank would not mention anything as well. It was an unspoken rule. Lucian knew that. After leaving Hank's office, Lucian decided to visit Pierre in the library. After all, they worked together for more than 2 months. Lucian should at least say goodbye to him as friends. Staring blankly, Pierre was sitting behind the counter, which was blanketed by 2 outspread newspapers. Good morning, Pierre, Lucian greeted. As if he was suddenly awakened from a dream, Pierre gazed at the person standing in front of him for a moment in puzzlement. Then he slowly answered, Lucian. As soon as he called the name, his face darkened. My fault. I shall call you Mr. Evans now. Pierre's attitude surprised Lucian quite a bit. Lucian thought he knew Pierre's personality relatively well from working together with him in the past 2 months. In his mind, Pierre was never a silly or an arrogant jerk. Pierre, why? Lucian was confused. You guys ruined harpsichord. You guys know nothing about harpsichord. Pierre's dark brown eyes were filled with anger. Lowering his head, Lucian saw the newspapers on the counter, of which the 2 articles on the current pages were both about Victor's piano concerto. Lucian remembered the details of the 2 articles, since the content was already stored in his spirit library just now when he was flipping through the newspapers. One of the articles praised the improvement that Victor made with traditional harpsichord and applauded for the impressive features of the new music instrument, the piano, while the other criticized the playing skills Victor used during his playing, accusing Victor's new fingering with piano a betrayal of classical fingerings and the great tradition of music. You may hold different opinions, and I understand, Pierre. Lucian tried to mediate, but we don't have to argue over this. Just leave the discussion to the musicians and critics. Answer me. Do you think you really understand harpsichord? Pierre directly ignored Lucian's words and questioned him again. Lucian came up with the book that Pierre once recommended him to read, which was titled The Art of Harpsichord Performance. Locating it in his spirit library, Lucian noticed the name of the author was Antonio Sandor. Your father is? Antonio Sandor, the author of The Art of Harpsichord Performance, asked Lucian. Pierre paused a moment. Then he squared his shoulders and answered proudly, Yes, I am the son of Antonio Sandor, a great harpsichord musician. That's why you're so angry. Lucian stared up at Pierre and asked calmly, The great achievement made by my father can never been ruined by you guys, answered Pierre with excitement. What is talking to me now is your prejudice, Pierre, not you. Lucian did not want to argue with him. Anyway, I just wanted to say goodbye to you. From today on, I won't be working in this library anymore. I was wrong about you, Lucian, said Pierre with strong dislike. I thought you honored music a lot, but in fact you're too arrogant to show your respect. You'll definitely regret in the future if you don't stick to traditional fingerings. Watch out, you genius. Lucian opened his mouth and tried to say something, but finally gave up. He directly turned around and left the library. He thought Pierre and he would become friends. Lucian sighed in his mind. After all, a friend was easier lost than found. Since the concert was a great success, everyone was taking a weekend off for the first time in a long while. Lucian did not find Felicia in their practicing room on the 4th floor. Maybe Felicia will be at home in the afternoon, wondered Lucian. He still had no idea how to persuade Felicia to help him. Thinking about this, Lucian went back to the lobby and asked Elena if she knew about any house for rent in Gisu area. Since most of the musicians and players in Alto lived in Gisu, the Musicians Association was also responsible for providing house information and helping its musicians to find ideal places to live close to each other. Among the many choices, Lucian liked the two-story house located at number 116 in Gisu the most. The house was owned by a not very famous musician, who was now far away in the kingdom of Syracuse, serving a viscount as his music consultant. The location of the house was a bit remote in the area, but the rent was also cheaper, 1 thael per year. It was almost 10 in the morning. Lucian planned to take a look at the house this afternoon after visiting Felicia. He wanted to move out as soon as possible. Now Lucian had to go back home and clean some of his stuff. "Take care, Mr. Evans." Elena smiled to Lucian, and Kathy slightly bowed to him respectfully. When Lucian came back to Audiobook, he saw many of the neighbors were standing in front of Annie Elise's place like the last time when John became a night squire. Every week, these poor people in Audiobook could luckily take a short break on Sunday, since they also went to the church in the morning. With the improvement of his spiritual power, Lucian's hearing was also now better than that of common people. He captured some of the words from the neighbors' conversation, and an ominous feeling came over him. "Hi, Roy. Why, there are so many people gathering here?" asked Lucian. "Hey, Lucian, it's been a while since the last time I saw you." With too much labor work, Roy, in his early 30s, looked much older than his age, and he did not know that Lucian had become the princess's music consultant yet. You know what? Every dog has its day, and Joel's lucky day finally comes. A noble lord invited Joel to be his family musician this morning. "What? Where is Uncle Joel now?" Lucian was surprised. Joel left in a hurry, and he took Elisa and his son together as well. "I bet the pay must be very good." Roy grinned. "Lucian, you did not know about it?" asked a middle-aged woman named Liz with curiosity. "People say you're a famous musician now, and it is because of your reputation that Joel has been invited. Is it true, Lucian? Are you famous now?" "Something's wrong," Lucian murmured, and he hurriedly asked them, "Who invited Joel?" Uncle Joel would never leave in such a hurry without even telling him first. Besides, even if there was a noble who admired Lucian's music and thus wanted Uncle Joel to be his musician, Lucian should be informed first. "How dare we ask a lord's name?" Liz and some other neighbors shook their heads. "We saw the lord dressed very decently, and he had many squires and servants. It was not right." Lucian's heart was torn with anxiety, but Lucian knew that he must stay calm. "Annie Liz, do you remember what the lord looked like?" Lucian frowned his brows. "Did Uncle Joel leave me any message?" "How dare we look at a lord's face?" answered Roy. "I only remember the lord was a very decent gentleman. His hair was all white, black suit, and a walking stick. The squires were so strong, all in their early 20s, at it novel been at." Although Roy tried his best to recall it, the information he provided was not really helpful. "Joel did leave a message to you," said Liz, "but nothing really special. He asked me to tell you that do not worry about him, and he will ask someone to send you a message when he reaches there." "That's it?" asked Lucian, putting up with the great anxiety in his mind. "That's it?" The neighbors knew nothing else. "Anything wrong, Lucian?" some of the neighbors asked. Taking a deep breath, Lucian calmed himself a bit. "Not really," Lucian answered. He decided to look for clues first and then inform John. There must be a purpose that they took Uncle Joel's family. Lucian had a spare key for the door. As soon as he entered the place, Lucian's spiritual power and his soul told him something was indeed not right. Lucian sensed the smell of a stranger in the room, and fortunately, this person did not erase the invisible smell and trail he or she left. And there was a white letter on the table. In order to stay calm, Lucian firstly closed the door. Then he reached his left hand into the pocket and grabbed Ice Revenger. Carefully, he controlled the aura of the ring surrounding his own body, since Lucian speculated that the person leaving the letter should not know that he was a sorcerer instead of a common young man. The ice coldness from the ring cooled Lucian down. With great caution, Lucian opened the letter using his right hand. This piece of paper was of no special material. It looked like the letter was printed instead of written, since every single letter on the paper was almost too neat. Dear Mr. Evans, it is our great honor to have Mr. Joel and his family with us. As long as you are willing to do us a little favor, we will take good care of them here. When we get what we want, Mr. Joel and his family will be back safe and sound, and with a decent amount of money. It is a fair trade. Kidnap. I knew it. Lucien lowered his voice and said to himself, But what do they want from me? At it novel been at. Soon after Lucien asked this question, the lines on the paper quickly faded and new black words appeared. Mr. Evans, as a music genius, your calmness is also impressive. Please let me repeat what I said just now. It is a fair deal, not a kidnap. Of course, when we talk about being fair, that means if you betray our agreement, you will never be able to see Joel and his family again. It is a supernatural power. Lucien's brain was working very fast. In order to have a bigger chance to save Uncle Joel and his family, Lucien couldn't let these people know the fact that he was a sorcerer as well. This was definitely not a trade, and kidnappers' promises were never trustworthy. Therefore, Lucien made an immediate decision. Instead of passively following the kidnappers' orders, he should have a careful plan and save Uncle Joel and his family himself. At the same time, buying time for planning was also very important. Taking a deep breath, Lucien talked to the piece of paper in a low voice. What do you want me to do? How can I know they're still alive? Several new lines appeared on the paper again. What we are asking is very simple, Mr. Evans. Use your talent and write more great music works to become Princess Natasha's long-term music consultant. And we believe that this is also your goal, Mr. Evans. Aren't we being really considerate? As for Joel and his family, as long as you are willing to work with us, we have no reason to kill them. Many thoughts quickly passed through Lucien's mind. Were they targeting Princess Natasha or other secrets in Rhotatia Palace? I was just invited to be the princess' temporary music consultant last night, and today these people kidnapped Uncle Joel and his family, which was almost impossible unless one of them, or even all of them, were among the audience in the concert last night. If I cannot make sure Uncle Joel and his family are safe, I will not work with you. You can kill me, said Lucien decisively. Mr. Evans, I just want to clarify one thing. You are one of our plans, but not the only one. Unfortunately, you are not as important as you think. Lucien sneered, then kill them and kill me. It looked like Lucien's reaction surprised the kidnappers. After the last message disappeared from the paper, nothing new appeared for quite a while. Lucien was extremely nervous. He was not sure if his answer would put Uncle Joel and his family to death, but he had no other choice. Lucien must make sure they were still alive. Now it was time to be patient. Finally, several lines emerged on the paper again. Every once in a while, we will send you a picture of Joel and his family, starting from tomorrow. However, since you pissed us off, we decided to send you one of Joel's fingers tomorrow as well, to relieve your concern, Mr. Evans. Bastards! Grinding his teeth with hatred, Lucien said to the kidnappers, Every time, the picture you send must contain completely date and time information, or I won't be able to know if these are fake pictures that you make with your evil power. Lucien was hoping that he might be able to find some clues from the pictures. It won't be a problem. Deal, replied the kidnappers. Not until I see the picture tomorrow. Lucien was pretending that he knew nothing about magic power. But when I see Uncle Joel and his family, I'll keep my word. I swear, your word means nothing. The line showed up again, we can see. And if you dare report to the princess, we will send Joel and his family to hell in a second. Lucien had no idea how the kidnappers could observe him secretly in the palace. He wanted to know more, since purpose often revealed motive, and motive was the key clue to find the enemies hiding behind this. What specifically do you want me to do? It can't be just staying close to the princess, asked Lucien. The writing became a bit hasty. We're more than happy to know the schedule of the princess and the Grand Duke, as well as other interesting things going on in Rhotatia Palace. You just need to write what you know down on this piece of paper with a quill. The kidnappers were very crafty, and their real motives remained blurry. I see, answered Lucien slowly. If you have any need, you're welcome to ask us for help, Mr. Lucien. Hope we have a nice cooperation. The new lines were more illegible compared with the previous ones. All the lines disappeared, and the letter returned to a piece of white paper. Lucien removed his left hand from Ice Revenger and instantly felt the supernatural power disappear. Staring at the closed window with an expressionless face, Lucien slowly folded the piece of paper back and put it into the envelope. His heart was full of anger and hatred, and he already figured out who did this. They were the heretics of Argenthorn. With the help of Ice Revenger, when Lucien was opening the envelope, he sensed a tiny amount of supernatural power remained on the paper. When he was communicating with the kidnappers, Lucien was also doing his analysis of the power by comparing it with the different kinds of power he met before. Every time the letters appeared and disappeared, Lucien got one step closer to his conclusion. Firstly, the power was not magic. Secondly, the supernatural power was very similar to the power that Lucien felt from Cardinal Sard and Pastor Benjamin. Although Lucien could not tell the specific differences between the magic power he followed and the powers empowered by either god or demons, he was quite sure that what he was facing now was the latter. If Lucien's observation and speculation were correct, Argenthorn was the most likely, or say, the only possible answer for now. It looks like there's a bond between me and these bastards. Lucien needed to control himself hard from tearing the paper to shreds with anger. The piece of white paper should be a magic item of apprentice level. Someone's eavesdropping on me right now, and the person needs to stay relatively close to me. Probably within a radius of 100 meters. Still hard to find, though. Lucien thought to himself. According to the time it took the kidnapper to reply, the person should be a bit above senior apprentice level. Lucien was a bit encouraged, carrying the hope that he could save Joel and his family. He did not really trust the church, the princess, and the Grand Duke, since they would only focus on exterminating the heresy, instead of making sure the hostages were safe first. At the same time, Lucien never even considered for a second obeying the heretics' order. He would never surrender to those untrustworthy bastards. He knew what he was doing here. Walking out of the door, Lucien headed for the noble district. Footsteps hasty, eyebrows frowning, Lucien was acting like an ordinary person who encountered kidnapping for the first time. Meanwhile, he was also much calmer than most of the ordinary people. He knew where to go and what to do right now. Lucien tried to stay focused when he was walking on the street, separating his spiritual power from his body and making the power float in the air, as if his soul was overlooking his body. Lucien wanted to test if there was anyone among the crowd who was following him. However, since Sunday noon was often the busiest time in Audieron, and the kidnapper was currently more powerful than Lucien, he did not find anything special. The gate between Audieron District and the Noble District was open. However, this area was not busy at all. Only a few poor people from Audieron who were doing the most menial work in the nobles' places were going through the gate after going to the church. 2 guards were standing there, lazily leaning against the wall and looking at the poor people walking in hurry with some feeling of superiority. The guards were hopeless for becoming real knights, and since they joined the city guard and got spoiled by the prosperity of Alto, they soon forgot the many fighting skills that they learned from their previous training. All of a sudden, the guards noticed a young, good-looking man in decent white shirt and black suite coming toward the gate, which was quite unusual. They stopped Lucien instantly and asked, "Sir, what is your purpose entering the noble district?" Lucien's heart was being burned by the great anxiety. Thus his attitude was not very nice. "Are you questioning me here? Since when do I have to be questioned first to pass through the gate?" Rander, one of the guards, immediately regretted as soon as he stopped the young man in front of him. Without knowing a visitor's background, stopping the person randomly may put them in trouble since they never knew whether the person was actually a noble or someone important. Lucien's tough attitude made him even more nervous. He hurriedly apologized. "Sorry, sir. We're having a hard time searching for the demon followers and tend to overreact sometimes." "I'm sorry, sir." Lucien slightly nodded and was about to pass through the gate when he changed his mind. He turned to the guard and asked in a low voice, "May I ask where does the chief clerk of the town hall, Mr. Urbane Hain, live?" "I'm his daughter Felicia Hain's classmate. Happening to know where the chief clerk lived," Rander answered. "Mr. Hain lives at number 158 Noble Street, one of the Hain family's houses." "Thanks," Lucien replied shortly and walked through the gate. In the noble district, where many knights and even grand knights lived, Lucian expected that the kidnapper from Argenthorn would not be able to follow too close. Therefore, by asking the guard, Lucian purposefully let the kidnapper know where he was going. If the kidnapper still could not follow up, that meant he or she was not at all capable of tailing Lucian for a long time, and then Lucian could find a proper chance to get rid of the kidnapper and conduct his own plan. Staring at Lucian from behind, Rander complained to the other guard. Although the guy dressed like a gentleman, he even didn't know where the chief clerk lives. Probably there's something between this effeminate guy and Lady Hayne. Who knows? It was the second time Lucian came to the noble district. Compared with the stormy night when Baron Lauron died, the noble district looked much more appealing today. Green trees lined up on both sides, and flowers flourished. Among the trees stood the big and luxury houses. Many of them were of different architectural styles. Some were similar to Baroque style, others of religious style, while some were emulating the gloomy and extravagant architectural design of the ancient magic empire. And often there was only one house on each fork of the road. Lucian appeared to be rather weird on the street since he dressed decent, but was walking on foot. A few noble ladies and gentlemen passing by in their coaches threw Lucian a surprised glance, certain that Lucian was by no chance a noble. All of a sudden, a coach stopped beside Lucian. The window on the coach opened, and inside of the coach sat an elegant young lady of full figure and fine presence, with a black crepe bonnet veiling half of her face. She laughed and asked, "Is this Mr. Evans? The concert last night was awesome." Despite being anxious, Lucian maintained his gentleman manner. "Thank you, my lady. Can I have the honor of knowing your name?" "I'm Yvette Hill, Felicia's friend." Yvette glanced at Lucian with great interest. "Are you looking for Felicia, Mr. Evans?" Excluding the family of Violet, the Hill family, together with the Hayne and the Rafati family, were the three most influential noble families in the Duchy of Orveret. Each of the three families had a whole shire as their domain. Lucian just recognized the coat of arms on the coach, consisting of spears and grizzly. He answered with respect, "Yes, my lady." "Well, then you might have to wait a bit, Mr. Evans." Yvette's smile was very charming. Since the concert was a great success, Felicia is still praying in Golden Cathedral to thank the blessing of God. "And, by the way, just call me Yvette. I'm a fan of your music, Mr. Evans." "Then, Miss Yvette, you just call me Lucian." Lucian worked at a smile. "I can just wait for Felicia to come back outside of her house. If you don't mind, Lucian, I can give you a lift." Yvette took off her crepe bonnet, and her beautiful face was completely revealed. "You're 2 years younger than me. What a genius you are." Her maid opened the coach door and invited Lucian to come in. It seemed like Yvette did not worry at all that this might damage her reputation as a noble lady. Lucian did not refuse. As a member of the Hill family, Yvette was also able to get Moonlight Rose. If Felicia rejected Lucian's request, becoming a friend with Lady Yvette would be Lucian's second possible chance. Entering the carriage, a sweet, alluring scent snuck into Lucian's nose. "Very nice. A genius is indeed different," said Yvette with satisfaction. "Most of the men that I invited before were just hypocritical. They wanted to come in, but they didn't dare." Leaning forward, her plump and fair chest was half revealed in front of Lucian. "Adet novel ben adet." However, Lucian was really not in the mood. Slightly turning his eyes away, Lucian forced a smile. "Stick to your own path, and let the irrelevant people say whatever they want to say. It doesn't matter." "Interesting. I like it." Yvette's eyes lit up for a moment. "You're more interesting than I thought, Lucian." The coach went slowly. Inside of the coach, Yvette was casually talking to Lucian about music and purposefully made tiny physical contact with Lucian. Unfortunately, Lucian's mind was completely occupied by the kidnapping, and he completely ignored this noble lady's elaborate seducing. Yvette was quite disappointed. Half an hour later, Yvette's coach finally stopped in front of a luxurious 3-story house. At the same time, Felicia's carriage arrived as well. "Lucian, why are you with Yvette?" Felicia looked at her classmate quizzically. Getting off the coach, Lucian answered, "I was looking for you when I met Lady Yvette. She kindly offered me a ride." "What did you do, Yvette?" Felicia looked a bit angry. "What can I do?" Yvette grinned in her coach. No worries, Felicia. I prefer mysterious sorcerers compared with musicians. What do you mean? Since when you change your preference? Asked Felicia with surprise. Since last night, replied Yvette full of yearning. Last night during the concert, I heard Cardinal Sard and the Grand Duke were talking about a mysterious sorcerer called Professor. I'm very curious. After all, I haven't tried any sorcery yet. I wonder, these gloomy guys who always hide their faces in their hoods, what do they look like when they are naked in bed, and how they react when they see a beautiful woman? As the youngest daughter of Earl Hill, she was qualified to sit in the same balcony with the Grand Duke. Yvette, Felicia was speechless. Although Yvette and Felicia were pretty good friends, Felicia never understood Yvette's openness with men. As a very maverick noble lady in Alto, Yvette was even much more open than the noble madams and ladies in the Palace of Tria. Lucien was very surprised, not because of Yvette's openness, but the fact that the church and the Grand Duke had already found out his pseudonym, Professor. Was anyone caught that night? Or were there moles among the sorcerers? Lucien wondered, with his back being covered by a thin layer of cold sweat. Lucien was just about to buy some magic potions that increased his power from the other sorcerers to save Joel and his family. Luckily, he heard the conversation between the noble ladies. What a valuable piece of information. I have to go now. Bye. Yvette was happy to see the surprised look on both Felicia and Lucien's faces. Turning around, Yvette's coach left. Noticing that Lucien was still staring at the coach in a trance, Felicia sneered at him. You want to be part of Yvette's collection, don't you? And then she paused a bit and asked, Why you came to me today, Lucien? Looking around, Lucien made sure there was no one near them. Then Felicia and Lucien walked through the garden in front of the house. Can I ask you to do me a favor, Felicia? Lucien looked serious. A favor? Felicia slightly frowned her beautiful eyebrows. My father's just a chief clerk, and my uncle never liked us. I'm not sure if I can help. If Lucien asked before the concert, Felicia would directly reject him. However, now that Felicia had seen Lucien's talent, she knew that having a good relationship with Lucien would definitely benefit her a lot. What the noble life taught Felicia in the past years was not only how to enjoy the luxury lifestyle, but also how to weigh the advantages and disadvantages. Lucien spoke to Felicia with a bit hesitation. I have a good friend, John. He's currently Lord Ven's high-level knight squire. John's family offered me lots of help when I was sick and poor. Since last night the concert was a great success, I believe it's time for me to pay them back. And the best way is to help John become a real knight. I think I know what you want now. Felicia guessed. You want to buy Moonlight Rose from me to help your friend awaken his blessing? Yes, I believe it's the best I can do. Lucien was sort of relieved that Felicia did not doubt his motive. You're a good person, Lucien. Felicia appreciated his character. It's pleasant to have a friend like you. But Lucien, Moonlight Rose is expensive, and it's never a guarantee for awakening blessing. Many nobles tried and failed. Felicia's heart slightly sank when she was speaking, since she was one of the nobles she just mentioned. I did some research about it. Lucien was trying to make his request as reasonable as possible. John's a promising young man. Lord Ven might soon award John with some of the dust of the rose, but it probably won't be enough. The more dust of Moonlight Rose John has, the better the chance he would have to successfully awaken his blessing. I want to help John with it. A beautiful smile appeared on Felicia's face. She slightly nodded. Well, you're really something, Lucien. How much do you want, then? 50 grams. Lucien needed to make sure that he would have enough of the ingredients to make the potion named Crying Soul, including the possible failures during the process. What? That's too much. Felicia was very surprised. Based on my status in the family, I can only buy up to 10 grams. Although Felicia's father and the current Earl Hayne were brothers, they had a poor relationship with each other due to the many years of contending for power. Thanks to the generous legacy left by the previous Earl, Felicia's grandfather, Felicia's family could still maintain a decent noble lifestyle. Felicia, can you figure out a way to get more? As much as possible. Lucien came up with another reason. I heard people say that the dust of Moonlight Rose can also improve one's coordination. I might need some as well to improve my piano playing skill. I'll never forget your help, Felicia. Crossing her hands together, Many thoughts flashed through Felicia's mind. As friends, she could help Lucien with 10 grams of the rose. However, now Lucien was asking way more than that. Then Felicia needed to see how she could benefit from it. Lucien did not urge Felicia, leaving her some time to consider. A while later, Felicia said to Lucien seriously, 10 grams from my father. Yvette and Melissa, 10 grams each. Lucien, 40 grams is my limit, and I won't do this for free. Although Felicia did not have any title, and her family status was not very superordinate, as a noble, Felicia's social circle was still of great value. 40 grams. Well, let's do 40 grams. Thank you so much, Felicia. And what you want me to do? Asked Lucien. My request is simple and easy. Felicia smiled. Firstly, you gotta pay me in advance. Secondly, my birthday party will be held next month, and I want you to be there on my birthday and play several songs in front of the guests. And thirdly, I want you to teach me how to play piano, how to compose, and offer me your help as much as possible in music field, such as introducing my future music work to the princess. Felicia heard that Princess Natasha appreciated piano very much. Among her 3 requests, without doubt, the most important one was the last. Every time a new piece of musical instrument was invented, many musicians were thus inspired and became famous with their new music works. Felicia did not want to miss this precious chance. Since she held little hope in becoming Mr. Victor's honor student, learning from her talented classmate, who was now the personal music consultant of the princess, was not bad. At it novel been at. You have my word, Felicia. Lucien agreed, and he said silently in his mind, as long as I'm still an alto at that time. Even if I were to leave, I'd do something else to compensate for it. Felicia trusted Lucien's good character. She nodded and said, 40 thales. Give me 2 days. 2 days is fine. But Felicia, said Lucien with embarrassment, I only have 30 thales for now. The rest of it, 10 thales, can I pay you back in 5 months? You know I'm currently working for the princess. The salary should not be a problem. Well, all right, agreed Felicia. Pay me back as soon as possible. The 10 thales will come from my savings. Don't let me go broke, Lucien. Thank you so much, Felicia. Lucien was excited, although his bellying money bag instantly shriveled. After all, buying Moonlight Rose was Lucien's top priority for now. Lucien was very grateful that he had the chance to enter the music circle in alto, and thus got to know the nobles like Felicia, or he would have no choice but to go to the black market or join another sorcerer group to find the rose, which would be way more risky. Leaving Felicia's place, Lucien bought some good quality bread and beef on his way home. By cooking and eating, Lucien calmed himself down. Closing the door and the windows, he took out the envelope from the crate and opened the letter again. Within his expectations, there were a few lines on the paper. Why did you go to the noble district and met your classmate? You stayed in the garden with her for more than 20 minutes, and we saw it. Don't act like an idiot, Mr. Evans. Lucien sneered in his mind. It looked like the bastards used other ways to trail Lucien instead of marking him with their fiend power, in case Lucien would be detected by the many divine power circles placed in Rhotatia Palace. Since Lucien also understood about supernatural power, he was quite sure about it. Lucien answered honestly. I went to buy Moonlight Rose from Felicia to help John. You kidnapped Joel and his families, and I'm not sure if they can come back safe and sound. John is the only one in the family I can take care of for now. A few sentences appeared. Taking care of John? We know what you want to do. Please stop daydreaming, Mr. Evans. It's not easy at all to awaken the blessing, or there would be way more nights in the world. Since your stupidness and recklessness is very impressive, we decided to give you a bonus. A finger from Elisa. God damn it. Lucien swore in his mind, which was filled with hatred. At the same time, Lucien took out a quill and started transcribing the sentences on the back of a piece of used paper. The great hatred was burning Lucien's guts like fire, while his brain was as cool as a piece of ice. The strange mixture of fire and ice shaped Lucien's character. Lucien was transcribing the sentences to figure out if the kidnappers could see what he was doing now. He would not start making Crying Soul until he knew more about these bastards. When Lucien was transcribing the sentences, a scarlet line of words suddenly emerged on the white paper, as if blood was leaking out. Stop what you're doing now, or you'll receive a body." The quill dropped on the ground. Lucien pretended that he was scared. "I was just trying to make some notes, in case I might forget some of your requests. We don't see any necessity to take this ridiculous notes. This is your last chance, Mr. Evans. Keep taking similar actions if you're looking forward to a dead body. Let me remind you, thanks to what you did, one more finger for you tomorrow," replied the kidnappers. Of course, the fact that Uncle Joel and Auntie Elisa were hurt was very painful to Lucien. However, he couldn't let the feeling of guiltiness and pain affect his judgment too much. From the moment Lucien decided not to cooperate with the kidnappers, he knew that there must be a cost. What he could do was minimize the cost as much as possible. "I'll behave." Lucien tore the used paper up. "The kidnappers can see me. That's for sure." Lucien silently thought in his mind. "But how? Are they observing me through the letter? Or with something else? I shall figure this out next, but not in a hurry, in case they will find out what I'm trying to do." Putting the letter back in the crate, Lucien lay in his bed, pretending he was totally out, while trying to cover the whole shack with his spiritual power to sense if there was any supernatural power around. At this time, using spells to help with the detection might put him in big trouble, since Lucien knew that his current biggest advantage was that the heretics did not know he was actually a sorcerer. Except for the letter in the crate, nothing supernatural was detected in the shack. In the afternoon, Lucien came to Gissou District and found the house at number 116 that Elena introduced to him. The location was even better than Lucien thought. Located beside the city wall, the house was far away from the gate, and thus the place was very quiet and isolated. Only a few two-story small houses were sitting a distance away from number 116, almost fully shaded by the many tall trees named Rava. Earlier, Lucien had made an appointment with the agent. Knocking at the gate, he waited in front of the iron fence. Soon a middle-aged man walked out from number 116 and opened the gate. His beard was well trimmed, and his brown suit was neatly ironed. The agent looked pretty shrewd. "You must be Mr. Evans." The man greeted Lucien. "I'm Brian. It's very nice to meet you. Everyone in the association is talking about you." Lucien nodded and extended his right hand to shake hands with Brian. Brian took a step forward and held Lucien's right hand with his both hands to show his respect. Facing such a promising young musician whose talent was already recognized by the Grand Duke and the Princess, Brian, of course, would show his greatest esteem for Lucien. "Please let me lead you into the house and take a look around, Mr. Evans." Brian slightly bowed. Under Brian's guidance, Lucien walked throughout the house and found that although the size of the garden and the lawn were not big, inside the house the decoration style was very elegant and unique. Compared with the present luxurious Tria Palace trend in decoration, this house looked neat in a very tasteful way. The only disadvantage of the house was that the tall trees and the city wall shaded most of the sunlight, and thus the place looked a bit gloomy, especially with the vines covering the outside of the house. It's a very, very quiet place, with no bright sunlight disturbing your music creation work. Brian tried to persuade Lucien to see this as an advantage instead of something not ideal, although poor lighting was the only reason that they were having a hard time renting the house out. Lucien did not mind the poor lighting at all, since this could provide him with a safer environment to conduct his magic experiments. So he nodded. "Do you have the lease agreement with you?" Brian was very happy, trying hard to prevent his crafty smile from showing on his face. He took out a pile of papers and handed them to Lucien. Taking a rough look at the lease agreement, Lucien signed his name on it and took out a thail from his money bag. Luckily, as a rather promising musician, Lucien did not have to pay any security deposit. Brian quickly wrote the receipt and took care of the agreement, and then handed a copy back to Lucien. "This is a house with a decent size, Mr. Evans. You'll need at least a steward for servants, a cook, a gardener, a coach, and a coachman. I can find these people for you from other associations," offered Brian fawningly. "I'm pretty busy recently, and I won't be moving in very soon. You can bring them here next Monday, and let me have a look." Lucien agreed, but postponed it for a week, since he did not want anything to disturb him from saving Joel and his family. This week would be the key time for him to save the hostages. Brian handed the keys to Lucien and left briskly. Lucien was by himself, standing in the living room, staring at the stairs to the second floor. There were 4 bedrooms, a study, a music practicing room, and a decent-sized patio on the second floor. On the ground floor, there was a living room, a dining room for servant rooms, a storage room, and there was also a basement. The kitchen was isolated, connected with the house by a door on the left. And the sewers were well built, linked to the whole sewer system of Alto. If the kidnapping had not happened, Lucien would feel very excited and proud that he finally moved into such a nice place. However, now the only thing Lucien felt was anger and anxiety. After a while, Lucien went back to his shack. He brought some clothes with him and took them back to the new house. He left his clothes in the master bedroom and walked into the practicing room, which was built with a special kind of stone to prevent the sound from disturbing other people, and at the same time, to create a nice reverberation effect. He closed the door and the curtain. The whole room was very quiet. Except for his own footsteps, Lucien could hear nothing else. Sitting in the rocking chair, Lucien rocked himself back and forth in the darkness. Spreading his spiritual power within the room, he was carefully sensing the surroundings. He wondered how the heretics would observe him without the letter. For quite a while, Lucien found nothing. His awareness gradually reached out to every corner of the room. At that moment, Lucien finally sensed what he was looking for, a tiny disturbance wave caused by a supernatural power, and he heard something buzzing lightly. He didn't open his eyes and pretended to be asleep while thinking to himself, Alto Tigrid Mosquito? Did they mark the mosquito with their fiend power, or was it directly transfiguration? Lucien's purpose was already achieved. Now he was sure that the heretics were using the letter for both communicating and monitoring. However, when Lucien was away from the letter, they needed to use other ways to trail him. The letter did not mention anything special in the evening, but only reminded Lucien to bring the letter with him if he was moving out. Staring into the shades of the night, Lucien kept repeating the process of making Crying Soul in his mind to get familiar with it. However, it was not the proper time to make the potion yet. Lucien still had to take care of several things first. Adet novel benadet. In the morning of the second day, when Lucien was about to go outside, he noticed that there was a ball of paper beneath the door. His heart suddenly sank. Lucien knew what was in it. Slowly opening the paper ball, Lucien saw 3 fingers. 2 were long but with heavy callus, and 1 was stubby. The fractured white bones were slightly reflecting the sunlight. Lucien closed his eyes to hold back his tears and to hide the anger and hatred. When he opened his eyes again, he also noticed a small black ball wrapped in the paper, with a scarlet line of words beside. That's what you wanted, Mr. Evans. It seems like you received our gift already. The 3 fingers are just a warning for you. Don't do stupid things, or we'll have no choice but to kill Joel and his family. We can see you, and we're way more powerful than you think. The ball is called Scene. Crumble the ball, and you'll see what you want. Lucien already sensed the magnetism of the small ball, which should be able to function like a camera. Thus, without hesitation, Lucien destroyed the ball with his hand. Dark smoke came out from the ball, and the smoke gradually took the shape of a black and white screen, showing Lucien a short moving scene. In the video, Joel, Elisa, and Ivan were sitting around a wooden table. Ivan's eyes were half closed, looking rather sleepy, while Joel and Elisa looked very worried, with their hands swathed in bandages. From the window of the log cabin, Lucien could tell it was late at night. Few dim stars were hanging in the sky, and the silver moon was shaded by the clouds. The moving scene lasted for a minute. On the letter, new sentences emerged. Mr. Evans, now you see they are still alive. We'll send you more scenes when the weather changes. We believe that the weather, the stars, and the silver moon can provide you with enough information to tell the different dates. You see, we always value our words. That is a good relief to me, wrote Lucien. What shall I say if John comes back? While Lucien was asking, he was picturing in his mind the sky that he just saw from the ball. What he was trying to do was to tell what stars they were based on the stellar map drawn by the witch in her notes. Combining the season, the arrangement and the brightness of the stars, as well as the angle that Lucien was observing the sky through the window, Lucien was confident he could find some valuable information from this 1-minute moving scene. After all, astrology was his specialty. From the several apprentice meetings that he attended before, Lucian already had a solid understanding in apprentice-level astrology, and as a college student crossing over, his knowledge in astrology was relatively more advanced compared with the ancient system. The letter replied, "Just tell him honestly. We don't care about a night squire, and we bet he wouldn't dare to risk his family's lives. And you, Mr. Evans, be careful when you go to Ratatia Palace tomorrow." Every Tuesday and Thursday, Lucian was scheduled to go to Ratatia Palace to meet the princess and discuss music with her. If the princess had extra need, she would summon Lucian at any time, and there would also be an extra pay for him. The words on the letter gradually disappeared one by one. Finally, the paper returned to normal blank. Folding the letter and wrapping up the 3 fingers, Lucian put them back into the crate. On his way to the Musicians' Association, Lucian's mind was fully occupied with the stars. "I made my request yesterday, then the ball and the fingers arrived today. So first of all, Uncle Joel and his family should still be somewhere close to Alto. A village, small town, or even a forest, all possible." Lucian's brain was working hard. By comparing the stellar maps in his spiritual library, and through lots of calculations of the coordinates of the stars, Lucian identified the few stars that he saw from the scene. Looking up the star list in the spiritual library, Lucian targeted one of the stars and found out its detailed record. The log cabin should be about 20 kilometers west of Alto. That is to say, Lucian was looking up a simple map of Alto and its surroundings stored in his own library. The cabin is deep within Melzer Black Forest. Drawing a circle on the map, Lucian was very excited. Although he still couldn't accurately locate where Uncle Joel and his family were. And he was also not sure about how powerful the heretics were. Knowing that Joel, Elisa, and Ivan were not far away from him provided him with a bit comfort. Lucian hoped that the next time he saw the scene, the log cabin would still be there. Then he would be able to narrow down the range further. Trying to calm himself down, Lucian sighed silently. Every step is so tough. He knew that, currently, he was still not prepared to save Joel and his family. The 2 ladies who were on duty today in the association's lobby weren't familiar to Lucian. One of them stood up and bowed slightly. "Good morning, Mr. Evans. Your personal office has been assigned by Mr. Hank. Please go to Mr. Hank's office when you have time." Lucian was about to find a quiet practicing room. Now it was a surprise for him to have his own office, which was great for his plan. A while later, being led by Mr. Hank, Lucian entered his own office on the 3rd floor. "Evans, this is your office now. Unless you join other countries' music associations, until the last day of your life, the office will still be yours." The building of the Musicians' Association was magnificent. A courtyard was surrounded by 70 to 80 different rooms on the 3rd floor, but almost half of them were currently vacant, since many of the famous musicians in Alto had been invited to other countries. The office was decorated with a brown carpet, fine statues, paintings, and lights. The dark blue couch looked very comfy, beside which stood a decent redwood desk. A milk-white piano was in the corner of the office. And there was also a den in the office, where the musician could rest a bit in the bed without being disturbed. "It's a great room." Lucian smiled politely. "Thank you, Mr. Hank. You're more than welcome, Evans. And just call me Hank." Hank nodded. After Hank left, Lucian closed the office door and walked back and forth in his office with great anger and anxiety. He was holding back his emotion when he saw the fingers. Now he was by himself. Lucian could not take it anymore. All of a sudden, Lucian sat in front of the piano and pressed the keys with both of his hands. It was Symphony of Fate that Lucian was playing. When the sound of the piano became louder and louder, Lucian started swearing in a low voice. "Bastards, jerks, UF ***, king, evil kidnappers." The swearing was not only for venting. Lucian was testing to what extent the kidnappers could monitor him. When he finished playing, Lucian stood up and gave out a long sigh. Even if the heretics did hear his swearing just now, he could still explain to them that he was doing this was to prepare himself for the meeting with the princess tomorrow. However, when Lucian came back to his home in Audiobook, he only found a simple sentence on the letter. "Music is an ideal way to release emotions, Mr. Evans. Although the kidnappers just wanted to remind Lucien that he was under their surveillance all the time, the message offered Lucien another piece of valuable information. The method the kidnappers were using couldn't let them hear Lucien very well. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Lucien arrived at Victor's place on time. Although without saying anything, the way Athie looked at Lucien was filled with gratefulness. Athie had been accompanying Victor for many years, and he was sincerely glad that the concert was a great success. Renee, Colin, and David were also there. They stood up and greeted, "Good afternoon, Mr. Evans." Although Lucien's success was not yet well known among the common residents in Alto, Renee, Colin, and David had heard about it from Felicia and Annie's conversation. All of a sudden, they felt Lucien became strange in their eyes, and they subconsciously treated Lucien the same way they greeted their teacher, Mr. Victor. "I still feel it's sort of unreal until now." Lot stood up from the couch and gave Lucien a hug, smiling. Felicia also walked close to Lucien and whispered in his ear, "Tomorrow afternoon, I shall be able to give you the roses." "Thank you." "Thanks a lot, Felicia," said Lucien sincerely. Standing beside them, Lot almost could not believe his eyes. Since when they became this close to each other? Lot wondered. Turning around, Felicia noticed that Annie, Colin, and some other students were all standing around and trying to talk to Lucien. She slightly smiled and took a step forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, in order to celebrate the great success of the concert and the achievement Lucien made with his Symphony of Fate, I want to invite everyone to the ball on Friday evening in my family's house." Mr. Victor agreed, "And now I want to see how many of us want to attend the ball." Although Felicia was not willing to let other of her classmates have a close relationship with Lucien like she already did, she understood that purposefully excluding the other classmates was not a good way to leave a favorable impression on Lucien. "Really? I'd love to." Renee put a big smile on her face. "It's my great pleasure." All of the other students promised to go as well. "What about you, Lucien?" Felicia smiled. An idea suddenly flashed through Lucien's mind. He nodded and answered, "Of course, Felicia." The other students looked even more excited hearing that Lucien would attend the ball as well. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's save the excitement for the Friday." Mr. Victor walked downstairs with books under his arm, looking rather energized. "Now we have to start studying." Lucien was about to find a seat to sit down when Lot stopped him. Lot whispered in Lucien's ear, "I heard that Mackenzie doesn't like you at all. Be careful when you're in the palace." "Thank you, Lot." "I will," replied Lucien politely. However, his mind was fully focused on how to save Joel and his family. Lucien knew clearly that the longer he waited, the less chances he would have to save them. He was really not in the mood to consider how to deal with Mackenzie. Meanwhile, Lucien was also aware of the fact that he also had to be very patient. Unwisely rushing would put Joel and his family in great danger. At that moment, Lucien felt like he was tightrope walking over a cliff. He had to find his balance between being patient and being ready to seize the chance. Leaning too much toward either side would instantly throw him off the wire. With the outstanding memory and proper ways of studying, now Lucien could read most of the materials with ease. Immersing himself in the world of music, for a moment Lucien was distracted from his anxiety, and a bold plan was gradually taking shape in his mind. Finishing today's study, Lucien went back to his shack, wrapped some stuff up, and brought them to his rented house. Everything seemed to be quite normal. Thus, when Lucien took out the letter at night, there were only a few simple sentences on it. "Be careful tomorrow. Don't do stupid things. We're watching." Lucien had a sound sleep last night, and he felt rather revitalized when he woke up. "Today is very important. I can't make any mistake," Lucien thought to himself. Nothing new was on the letter. After having breakfast, Lucien came to the association and found a practicing room. He started playing the piano to reduce his anxiety. Lucien was still not skilled enough to perfectly play Symphony of Fate. After reviewing the basic fingering, Lucien started to play Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 8 in C minor, commonly known as Sonata Pathetique. He did not know why he found special affection in Beethoven's music works. Maybe it was because he could understand the sufferings and the pain Beethoven went through, and he appreciated the music master's perseverance and heroic spirit. Since Lucien never practiced Sonata Pathetique before, his playing was pretty horrible. However, Playing this piece of music over and over again became a good way for Lucien to exhaust himself, and thus to release the pressure. Later, Lucien took a break in his office. Someone knocked at the door of Lucien's office at 10:30. It was Elena. "Lucien, the princess's coach is waiting for you in the front. I'll be right there." "Thanks, Elena," replied Lucien. He slowly stood up from the couch and walked toward the mirror. Staring at himself in the mirror for 30 seconds, Lucien took a deep breath and walked out of his office. Sitting straight inside of the dark purple coach decorated with the coat of arms of the Violet family, Lucien felt the movement of the coach was rather smooth. The dark yellow carpet made in trio was thick and comfy, and the wine on the small table had a nice, deep ruby red color. However, Lucien did not feel like having a drink at all, since he had to make sure he would stay sober and calm in the palace. A bit more than 10 minutes later, the coach arrived at Rhotatia Palace on time. The magnificent front gate of the palace was made of stone and was engraved with relief sculptures of many famous heroes in history. A dozen of guards, led by a mighty and muscular knight, were standing in front of the gate. After a security check of Lucien's personal belongings, the knight waved his hand and let the coach pass. As soon as Lucien entered the huge gate, he sensed the solemn and mighty divine power enveloping the whole palace. This light, golden-colored palace was the most spectacular and magnificent structure in Alto. Besides its great momentum, the details of Rhotatia Palace were also created with exquisite handcraft. The symmetrical architecture showed the majesty of the Grand Duke House. The two castle-like palaces in both western and eastern wings were connected by a grand palace complex in the center. In front of the main palace, there was a large square with fine spray fountains, covered with rare and beautiful trees and flowers. A broad artificial river ran through the square, in which a few boats were floating by the riverbank. The coach which Lucien was sitting in followed the avenue, going through the garden, and crossed the long bridge over the artificial river, and it finally stopped right in front of the main palace. Two beautiful maids were already waiting there. "Mr. Evans, please follow us to the princess music practicing room." The two blonde-haired girls looked like twins. They greeted Lucien with respect. "Thank you." Lucien nodded politely. Following the two maids, he saw more details of the palace on his way to the practicing room. The designers and the architects used the finest colorful stone as the main building material of the palaces, and all the different kinds of stones were shining brightly in the sunlight. Inside of the palaces, the stairs and the handrails were carefully gilded, and according to the different themes of the palaces, dazzling decorations such as huge crystals, fine white laces, and gorgeous dome paintings could be seen everywhere. Being very familiar with the path, neither of the maids talked to Lucien on the way, but just walked in front of him. They were trained to be respectful and remain silent. Soon Lucien came to a very charming corridor. Facing the direction of the garden, there were 24 arched windows on one side of the corridor, while on the other side, 24 mirrors were reflecting the beauty of the sight in the garden, as if the corridor was also fully planted with the fine trees and flowers, which added radiance and beauty to the magnificent huge dome painting above. This was the best-known part of Rhotatia Palace, the Paradise Corridor. Lucien had read about it before, when he was working in the association's library. Passing Paradise Corridor, which featured the great style of divinity, Lucien finally arrived at the palace where Princess Natasha lived. The palace had a unique name, War Gallery. Here Lucien saw many fine oil paintings showing the theme of war on the walls. "This is the princess's practicing room, Mr. Evans." The two maids led Lucien to a quiet room in the corner and asked him to wait for a moment outside, since they had to report to Lady Camille first. A moment later, Lucien was invited to enter the room. The practicing room was way bigger than any one in the association. The warm and sweet orange color of the room was peaceful and soothing. The carpet was very fancy, on which different kinds of musical instruments were carefully placed, and in the center of the room stood a light golden piano. Natasha was sitting in front of the piano, playing a piece of music called March of War. Her playing was very skilled, even better than many professional instrumentalists. However, it seemed like she was mimicking Victor's fingering intentionally, and thus her playing sounded a bit rigid. Adet novel ben adet. In her black dress, Camille was sitting in the couch at the far end of the room. Natasha stopped playing when Lucien came into the room. She turned around and smiled to him. I'm having a hard time here, following Victor's new fingering. Can you help me, Lucien? She talked to Lucien in a nice way, as if he was her old friend. Of course. It's my great pleasure. Lucien sat on the other bench and started to explain. Lucien knew that the princess was very interested in piano, and thus he was relatively well prepared for the possible questions the princess might have. Although he could not make a perfect explanation, Lucien was very honest and sincere, which made Natasha feel that when Lucien was providing her with the proper guidance she needed, at the same time they were also learning and exploring piano together. Time passed quickly. When Lucien was still introducing the new fingering, all of a sudden Natasha looked at him and asked, Lucien, is your mind being bothered by something? I can feel your anxiety. As a level 5 Grand Knight, Natasha's intuition told her that something was wrong with Lucien. With the outspokenness in her personality, the princess asked directly. Lucien forced himself to put a smile on his face. Maybe I'm too nervous in the palace, in front of the princess. Please forgive me, your grace. At the same time, Lucien had a good relief in his mind. Finally, the princess asked. The anxiety, the restlessness, and the nervousness that Natasha noticed were all conveyed by Lucien purposefully. Adet novel benadet. Lifting her beautiful eyebrows, Natasha said to Lucien, Don't be afraid of me because I'm a princess or a knight, Lucien. A man can respect or even worship someone else, but not be intimidated. That's the spirit of men, the spirit of knights. I'll work on it. Although I have a rather poor background, I'll get better. Lucien was a bit surprised by Natasha's comment, but he still answered properly. A gorgeous smile appeared on Natasha's face. You know what? You're already much braver than most people. Many of them couldn't even speak properly the first time they saw me, while you're brave enough to stare at Sylvia's legs the first time you saw her. Impressive. Natasha was talking about it pretty casually, as if it was just a joke. I'm terribly sorry. It was the first time I saw a silk stocking. I sort of forgot myself, explained Lucien awkwardly. I'm not a pervert. The left corner of Natasha's lips curled up. I totally understand, Lucien. Both ladies and gentlemen like the interesting byproduct of alchemy, and you're not excluded, of course. Silk stockings is precious since the magic empire was destroyed and the ancient alchemy was lost many years ago. I appreciate your understanding, your grace. Lucien nodded. But you looked at Sylvia for a pretty long time, which was not common. Are you really not a pervert? Natasha asked Lucien with great interest. She was making fun of him. I'm not. In fact, I haven't touched a girl's hand yet, in my whole life, admitted Lucien to justify his innocence. Oh, I see. Natasha drawled purposefully. Too bad for a 17-year-old boy. But now it won't be a problem anymore, after the concert. There will be lots of girls having interest in you. Do you want me to introduce you to some ladies? Although all of them will end up marrying nobles, it's not bad to have some sweet memories before getting married. Your Grace, thank you for your goodwill, but I want to devote myself to music in the next few years. You don't have to introduce me to any lady, refused Lucien, seriously. I don't have to? The princess did not have enough fun yet, so you want to pursue them on your own? I can teach you some secrets to win the heart of a young lady. I'm good at it. Sylvia, that little wild cat, she likes me. Camille all of a sudden started coughing and cut off Natasha. Your Grace, I feel this topic's a bit weird, said Lucien. He felt the princess was very approachable, but the conversations they had always tended to go somewhere else. Natasha glanced at Camille sitting on the other side and asked with surprise, What's wrong with it? It's no more than a common conversation between guys. Finally, Lucien realized the problem. Yes, between guys, but you're a noble lady, your grace. It doesn't matter, Lucien. Natasha shrugged. Actually, I can teach you more about how to pursue a girl than many guys. Lucien did not know what to say. All right. She waved her hand and smiled. Look at your nervous face, Lucien. Let's switch back to music. She was glad that Lucien was not like the many other nobles. Most of them directly refused to talk about this and viewed it as an improper topic for chatting. As for the playing skills we just mentioned, Lucien was a bit relieved. I got a question. Natasha was behaving like a good student. Yes, please. Lucien was waiting for the question. You sure you don't need any of my suggestion about pursuing girls? Natasha laughed loudly. Lucien was speechless. An hour flew by. Natasha was inspired and kept working on her composing. Camille stood up and walked Lucien out. In front of the gate, Camille said to Lucien in a low voice, "About the princess. Don't be a gossiper." Lucien nodded seriously. After having lunch, Lucien came to Victor's place and waited for Felicia patiently. "Mr. Athy, please sprinkle some sulfur in the living room. In the month of harvest, there are many mosquitoes around." "I will." Athy nodded. Felicia arrived half an hour earlier that day, knowing that Lucien must be waiting for the roses. In the corner of the living room, she took out a unique black bag with embroidered flame patterns on it and handed it to Lucien. 40 grams of dried moonlight rose. The roses were ground into dust already. This special bag can make the dust of moonlight rose last much longer. You can return the bag to me when you finish using it. Thanks a lot, Felicia. With great excitement, Lucien opened the small black bag in which the fine white powder was shining like a beautiful dream. After roughly weighing the bag, Lucien put it in his pocket. "I'll pay the money back to you as soon as possible, Felicia." "I hope so. That was my personal savings." Felicia smiled, and then she sniffed a bit. "Why, I smell sulfur here." "To drive the mosquitoes and bugs away," answered Lucien casually. Lucien made more mistakes than usual this afternoon, although he was trying hard to stay focused. Luckily, Mr. Victor did not say anything about it, thinking Lucien might need some more time to adjust to the big changes that the great success of the concert brought into his life. Finally, the class ended at 6 in the evening. Lucien came back to his shack in Audiobook, wrapped up some of his stuff in a small box, and cooked himself dinner. After all that, he opened the letter again. "Mr. Evans, you did a good job in front of the princess today. We hope you can be calmer, since your nervousness made you a bit suspicious. Talented as you are, we believe that it is not too hard." The heretics did not ask anything about the conversations Lucien had with the princess and what he saw in the palace. Lucien could tell they were trying to make him believe they had everything under their control. Putting on a worried look, Lucien folded the letter and put it into the small box. Then he carried the box with him and left for his rented house in Gisu district. In the house, Lucien put down the box in the master bedroom and took out a music book. It seemed like he would stay there for the night. When it was getting late, Lucien lay down in the bed and soon stood up again, looking a bit irritated. "The sheet is so soggy. Brian should find someone to dry the sheet first before asking me to move in." Then he stepped out of his bedroom and left the house, leaving the small box in his new place. After closing the window and locking the door, now Lucien was lying in his small bed in his shabby shack. 10 minutes later, Lucien jumped out of the bed again and swore, "These bloody mosquitoes." In the crate, Lucien found some sulfur, and he sprinkled the sulfur in every corner of his place. He wanted all the annoying mosquitoes and bugs to leave right now. Then he went back to bed and closed his eyes with satisfaction. In the night, Lucien faintly sensed the existence of a supernatural power in his shack, like a pair of eyes staring at him in the air. Without the help of Alto Tigrid Mosquito, the heretics finally started to monitor him directly using their fiend power. Pretending to be sleeping, Lucien waited patiently. An hour later, the magic eyes disappeared, but soon came back again. The duration is about an hour, Lucien thought to himself. Within his expectation, an hour later, the eyes disappeared again. Maybe the kidnappers believed that Lucien was just sleeping, or maybe they were changing shifts. 10 minutes later, Lucien sensed the eyes again. 30 minutes later, the eyes, all of a sudden, disappeared for the third time. And Lucien knew that now it was time for him to take action. He jumped out of the bed swiftly and messed up his blanket and sheet to give the kidnappers a false impression that someone was still sleeping in the bed. Recently in Audiobook, there were night watchers patrolling at night, and they could easily target the existence of the fiend power. Lucien knew that the heretics would not take the risk of being found by the church. Seizing the chance, Lucien sneaked into his underground magic lab. Lucien was aware that his whole plan was very risky. However, in the current situation, he did not have a second choice. Everything in the lab remained the same after the last time Lucien left. There was no scent of any strangers, but only the slight smell of sulfur coming from the secret air vent. In the first half an hour, Lucien was doing meditation to stay focused, and more importantly, to wait until the night watchers left and the heretic started to monitor his room again. After making sure nothing on the ground went wrong, Lucien started to activate the magic circles engraved on the table with his spiritual power. Then he took out a tube of revenant dust, 3 corpse mushrooms, some brain tissue of the aquatic zombie, and some other reagents. Wearing the gloves, Lucien picked up a corpse mushroom with a silver dagger and moved it into a magic circle for weighing. 6.72 grams. In his spirit library, Lucien recorded the weight of the mushroom, as well as the amount of usage of other materials and reagents. He put the mushroom into a glass container with magic runes on it, and then weighed a dry glass beaker. Lucien watched carefully when he was putting revenant dust into the dry breaker and stopped when there were 3 grams of the dust in it. Using the same method, Lucien weighed out 10 grams of moonlight rose dust. Then he turned to the brain tissue. Lucien grabbed the dagger and carefully cut it, as if the aquatic zombie's brain tissue was still alive. The moment Lucien's dagger touched it, the brain tissue suddenly shrank, as if many worms were living inside of it. Cold and sticky as the brain was, Lucien almost threw up when he was cutting it. All of a sudden, the phantom of countless ferocious aquatic zombies and revenants appeared in front of Lucien's eyes. Their skin and flesh were rotten, teeth were bleeding, and the smell of corpses was more than disgusting. Lucien frowned his eyebrows to stay focused. Following the structure of the cortex, he took out the inner part of the brain, and the phantom instantly disappeared. The rest of the brain tissue gradually calmed down. Had it not been at. After weighing the brain tissue, Lucien put a black, thick pot on the magic flame circle and adjusted the flame bit by bit until the color of the flame became a mix of gold and white. Lucien threw the corpse mushroom into the pot and added a small amount of water. Then he carefully stirred the mixture inside the container. The mushrooms slowly melted in the pot in a weird way. The stink was constrained within the magic circle. When the black, thick liquid in the pot started to bubble, Lucien calmly added the revenant dust and the dust of the rose. As soon as the 3 materials met each other, a thick black and silver smoke came out. There seemed to be lots of revenants fighting with each other. A sharp scream came into Lucien's ears, and the sharpness made him feel a bit nauseous. Lucien knew that he could not slack at the crucial moment. Being controlled by his spiritual power, the flame turned white. The black and silver smoke began to merge with each other and became pale, like the skin of a dead body. As time passed by, the smoke turned into water drops and stayed within the pot. Seizing the moment, Lucien added the brain tissue into the liquid. The water drops in the container quickly soaked the black brain tissue, and within 1 second, the brain disappeared. The whole magic lab suddenly became cold and dark. Even the flame in the magic circle suddenly being attacked by the infrasonic waves. Lucien retreated several steps and almost passed out. His guts were stirring inside of his body, and his head was buzzing. Lucien never expected this. Nothing like this was mentioned in the witch's notes. He started to cast the spell Silence Wall. Transparent walls showed up around Lucien to protect him from the attack of the sound waves. Several seconds later, Lucien cast Illumination. A bright light ball appeared in the air. In the light, Lucien saw lots of pale, human faces in the container. These transparent faces were rather blurry, but their viciousness and perniciousness was overwhelming. They were struggling in the magic circle, trying to get into Lucien's body. In the strong light, the faces gradually disappeared. When everything returned to normal, Lucien saw a small amount of black liquid remaining in the pot with a strong, burnt smell. The recipe should be correct, but the witch might have left out some annotations that she did not translate. Possibly it was because the brain tissue was from a mutant aquatic zombie. That almost killed me. Taking off the gloves, Lucien wiped the sweat on his forehead. I gotta find a chance to learn the language of the ancient magic empire. Crying Soul was one of the greatest achievements of the ancient Sylvanus magic empire. According to the witch's notes, only a few sorcerers had the recipe, and the making of the potion required an accurate amount of different materials and reagents. Even a tiny mistake would lead to failure. Luckily, this mutant aquatic zombie's brain had only a little more soul power than common ones. This time Lucien decided to use the best corpse mushroom he had. Following the same procedures, Lucien came to the last step smoothly. When Lucien threw another piece of aquatic zombie's brain into the pot, the sharp and bitter scream came out again. However, this time the noise was totally blocked by the transparent walls. Then he calmly added a small amount of other reagents. The white flame suddenly soared and fully covered the whole pot. Then, the now big flame quickly disappeared in the next second. Some black, bubbling liquid remained in the pot. Inside each of the bubbles, there was a horrifying and vicious face, crying and screaming. That was why the potion was called Crying Soul. Using Mage Hand, Lucien poured the black liquid into a glass tube. Observing carefully, Lucien was sure that the potion was made correctly. Lucien bit his lips for a moment and directly drank all the dark liquid in one draft. He did not have enough time to test the features of the potion. He needed to take the risk. The taste of the potion was actually not that horrible, but the texture was pretty weird. Soon Lucien felt a great pain in his body, as if the potion was tearing up his body into pieces. Lucien heard lots of crying, but he did not know if they were real. He crouched in great pain and then lay down, rolling back and forth on the ground. Lucien grabbed a piece of cloth and stuffed it into his mouth, in case he felt the need to scream. Although Lucien thought he was stronger than common people because of his exercising routine, now when facing the pain, he became very uncertain whether he could really awaken the potential in his body. His blood was burning and his veins were swelling. Lucien felt his body was about to explode. His skin was covered by thick blue and green veins, which looked very horrible. Blood came out of Lucien's body like red vapor, and then it went back into his body. In his blurry awareness, Lucien felt a cold and dark power was gradually taking over him. At that time, a bright light suddenly burst out of the projection of Lucien's host star in his soul and quickly linked to the real host star in the starry sky, which unrolled in front of Lucien's eyes. The star power started to infuse into Lucien's veins, fighting against the pain and trying hard to drive away the power of darkness. Lucien was hoping that the power of star could win inside his body. He did not want to be dominated by a more vicious power, which might also bring him trouble and danger in the future. Unfortunately, the power of death from the crying souls was still stronger. When Lucien was almost dead from the conflict of the two powers, his blood flow started to slow down. After all, Lucien had no choice but to accept the dark power, although he had no idea what the evil power would do to his body. At the same time, outside of Lucien's shack, a foot stepped out of the darkness. The silver moon in the sky suddenly lit up a bit, and the moonlight that entered Lucien's shack through the window became even brighter, as if there was a thin layer of frost around the place. In his blurry consciousness, Lucien saw a beautiful silver moon in his meditative starry sky and felt his body was covered with the gentle moonlight. The light became brighter and brighter. In the moonlight, a weak power which was hiding in Lucien's body woke up and was rapidly developing. Within only a few seconds, the new power overthrew the dark power and dominated the body. Lucien's blessing had finally awakened, and his power was related to the silver moon. His heartbeat gradually slowed down, calm as usual, although his body still felt limp and numb. Nothing like this was ever mentioned in the witch's notes or in the books that Lucien read before. He had no idea why the environment could affect his way of awakening the blessing. Outside of the shack, the other foot also took a step forward, leaving the shadows. On the feet there was a pair of black leather shoes. Then the leather shoes went back into the darkness and disappeared. The silver moon dimmed. Lucien stood up from the ground, feeling the power in his body. His hands became way stronger and now could easily break a person's neck. However, compared with the obvious increase of strength, Lucien could tell that the major benefit of his blessing was the great improvement to his agility, speed, and coordination. Lifting 1 foot, Lucien started to run in the lab. Although he was fast like a shadow, Lucien did not run down anything in that small place. My speed and my agility can almost compete with the level 2 knight with the shadow blessing that I met before, even though my power was awakened by the potion. Thus, if a level 1 knight has the same blessing I have, I'm sure that he would be even more capable in terms of agility when compared with a level 2 knight whose blessing is different. Lucien stopped to evaluate his power. However, regarding constitution and strength, a common level 1 knight can easily defeat me. Lucien calmed himself down to carefully feel the power and started to try the different aspects. Dark vision. I could see about 200 meters away at night. A silver light appeared in his black eyes. My body can be dematerialized into moonlight to protect myself. But right now I cannot do this completely, so the protection is relatively limited for now. Lucien's hands gradually became transparent. Only level 7 Radiant Knights can do this dematerialization completely. However, for now Lucien was already immune to the attack of common weapons such as swords and arrows, and could better stand the damage caused by magic weapons, divine power weapons and shockwaves, elemental damage caused by fire and acid, as well as necromantic power. Although currently the protection of moonlight seemed to be inferior than the Night Watcher's dragon scale from the blessing of the Red Dragon, Lucien was still pretty satisfied with his own blessing. Then Lucien cut himself with the silver dagger on his hand. The wound bled a bit and quickly recovered. To some extent, self-healing Lucien recorded. Unfortunately, Lucien's blessing couldn't be really used for launching attacks. Moonlight was not a dark blessing. The church had compiled a book about the knowledge of the most common blessings in order to help the new knights to improve themselves faster, and also for other uses. Lucien read the book in the association's library before, and he also heard John mentioning to him about his most yearning blessings, which helped him a lot to know about his moonlight blessing. According to the Handbook of Blessing, the power of moonlight could be further improved in general when the silver moon was present. However, at the same time, it would be weakened under the midday sun, but not as badly as the dark blessings, such as darkness, silver moon, vampire, etc. Lucien finally smiled for the first time in the last days. In general, moonlight was an ideal blessing for him. When Lucien was casting the spell to preserve the experiment materials, he surprisingly found that his spiritual power had been improved a lot as well. At novel Benet. Now Lucien was only 1 step away from becoming a senior apprentice, and he could cast 19 apprentice spells successively before his spiritual power was drained. The improvement was such a bonus for Lucien, but soon he calmed down. Putting all the stuff into boxes, Lucien was planning to secretly move them away to the house when there was a chance. The corner of the lab was piled with many gray stones, which were previously dirt from when Lucien was digging the basement. Some of the stones had been thrown away, but Lucien purposefully left many stones there as well. When he was digging, with an easy spell Lucien turned the dirt into stones, and now it was time for the stones to come in handy again. Lucien arranged the stones to make sure that they were in the correct position. When the chance was appropriate, Lucien would come back and easily fill the basement with dirt again, adversely using the same spell. Although more dirt was definitely needed to fully fill the place and make it even with the ground level, it would not be too difficult for Lucien, since now he was almost as powerful as a knight. After Lucien finished doing all of these, he walked to the wall and activated a small magic circle on it. Part of the stone wall gradually turned into dirt, and then he started to dig. 10 minutes later, the passage he was digging directly connected to an old one, the passage which was built by the witch to the sewers. As early as when Lucien was building his magic lab, he knew that a second secret exit was definitely necessary. And the easiest way of doing this was to link his secret passage to the one of the witch, since the deeper part of the witch's secret passage was still intact. Briefly concealing the new passage that he just dug, Lucien ran into the sewer as fast as he could with his moonlight blessing. His figure disappeared in the darkness like a shadow. Within Lucien's expectation, the church's security already decreased, as 2 to 3 months had passed since the last time the heresy was performed down here. Therefore, It did not take Lucien long to come back to the ground through the sewers, safe and sound. Lucien could see very well in the night with his dark vision. Instead of finding the kidnappers who were monitoring him in the area, Lucien first came to the old wall close to Annie Elise's place and wrote down a series of simple patterns, which meant, I read about a magic relic named Emden in an ancient literature which sat in the southeast of Melzer Black Forest. Owl, please find me a guide who knows the place among the apprentices in Alto. Make sure that philosopher, White Honey, and yourself are safe.